Hey everyone, welcome back to another session of Minecraft and Mayhem. Today we're settling in with a collection of stories that prove the worst betrayals sometimes come gift wrapped in love, friendship, and family. Buckle up because this ride starts messy and only gets wilder from there. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's been watching, dropping comments, and supporting the channel. It genuinely means a lot. Your engagement helps this community grow and makes sharing these stories even more worthwhile. So, Emma thought she had the picture perfect relationship, 6 years deep with someone she trusted completely, until a random scroll on the wrong phone changed absolutely everything. What started as a gut feeling turned into undeniable proof, and what came next was somehow even worse than the betrayal itself. I thought we were building a life together. 6 years of shared routines, inside jokes, the kind of comfortable intimacy that makes you feel like you found your person. We had a Saturday morning ritual at the farmer's market. Always hit the same coffee stand first, always split a cinnamon roll. We talked about getting a dog, maybe buying a house in a few years. Nothing extravagant, just solid and real, and ours. Then I found the texts. I wasn't even snooping, which somehow makes it worse. Their phone was on the counter, face up, and a notification popped up while I was standing right there making breakfast. Just a preview, but it was enough. Something about missing last night, followed by a heart emoji, from someone named Jordan, someone I'd never heard of. My stomach dropped. I stood there with a spatula in my hand, eggs burning on the stove, staring at that screen. I could have walked away, could have convinced myself it was innocent, just a friend, nothing to worry about. But I already knew. You know that feeling when your gut just tells you something is fundamentally wrong. Yeah, that. I picked up the phone. No passcode, we'd always trusted each other with that. The conversation was right there, months of messages, explicit photos, voice notes I couldn't bring myself to listen to, long paragraphs about how much they missed each other, how hard it was to sneak around, how they wished things were different. There were inside jokes I wasn't part of, plans to meet up at times I thought my partner was at the gym or working late, complaints about me, about how distant I'd been lately, how they felt trapped. The irony of that last part almost made me laugh. I'd felt us drifting too, had been trying harder to connect, plan date nights, be present. Turns out they were just checked out because they were busy building a whole separate relationship behind my back. When they came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with their phone in my lap. They saw my face and immediately knew. I watched them cycle through excuses in real time. Their mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, they just started crying. Full breakdown, hands over their face, saying they were so sorry, it meant nothing, it was just physical. They were going through something and made a terrible mistake. I asked how long. They hesitated. I asked again. 8 months. 8 months of sneaking around while I worried we were growing apart. While I blamed myself for not being attentive enough. While I suggested couples activities to bring us closer. 8 months of looking me in the eye every single day and lying. They begged, promised to cut contact immediately, said they'd do anything to fix this, that they loved me and only me. They said Jordan was just a distraction, a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. They were sobbing so hard they could barely speak, kept saying, please, please, please don't leave. I told them I needed space, stayed at my best friend's place for a few days, barely slept, couldn't eat. My friend was furious on my behalf, wanted me to torch their entire life, but I was just numb. 6 years, 6 years of what I thought was partnership, loyalty, building towards something, and they'd thrown it away for someone they met at the gym. When I came back to grab more of my things, they deep cleaned the entire apartment. Flowers on the table, my favorite takeout in the fridge, a handwritten letter about how sorry they were and how they'd spend the rest of their life making it up to me if I gave them another chance. I read it, felt nothing, put it back on the counter and kept packing. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 weeks later, they texted asking if I'd meet them for dinner. Said they wanted to talk, that they'd been in therapy, that they had something important to say. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Figured we needed to have an actual conversation about splitting our stuff. The lease, all the practical nightmare of untangling 6 years of shared life. They picked me up, wouldn't tell me where we were going. Just kept saying they wanted it to be special. I should have known something was off, but I was too exhausted to question it. We drove to this overlook outside the city, the same spot where we'd had our first real date. Sunset over the valley, absolutely gorgeous view. The place I'd told them 100 times was my favorite spot in the world. We got out of the car, they took my hand, led me to the edge where you can see for miles, started talking about how much I meant to them, how the past 6 years had been the best of their life, how they couldn't imagine a future without me in it. And then they got down on one knee. The ring was perfect. White gold band, oval diamond, exactly the style I'd pinned on Pinterest years ago when we first started talking about getting engaged someday. They must have gone through my old boards, found the exact one. They were crying again, saying that marriage was what we needed, that making that commitment would fix us, that they wanted to prove how serious they were about choosing me. I just stared at them, at the ring, at the sunset painting, everything golden like some kind of movie scene. And all I could think was that they'd spent 8 months sleeping with someone else, had lied to my face every single day, had made me question my own instincts and blame myself for our distance. And now they thought a ring would erase all of that, like I'd see the diamond and forget everything, like commitment could bury betrayal. I said no, not cruelly, not dramatically, just no, I can't do this. Their face crumbled. They stayed on one knee like maybe I'd change my mind if they just waited long enough. Asked me to think about it, to not make a decision in the heat of the moment, to remember everything we'd built together. I told them that's exactly what I was thinking about. Everything we'd built and how they'd demolished it for someone they barely knew. The drive back was silent. Horrible, suffocating silence. They dropped me off and I went inside and finally let myself fall apart. Because part of me had wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to believe that ring meant they'd really changed, that we could fix this. But the bigger part knew that you can't build a marriage on a foundation of broken trust and desperation. And here's where it gets absurd. Their family started calling. Their mum, their sister, even their dad, who I'd maybe spoken to 5 times in 6 years. All of them saying basically the same thing, that I was being unforgiving. That my partner was trying, was taking real steps to make amends, and I was throwing it all away. Their mum actually used the word cruel, said I was cruel for rejecting someone who loved me enough to propose after making one mistake. One mistake. 8 months. I stopped answering their calls. My own family was split. My mum thought I should consider it, that relationships take work and forgiveness. My sister said I should have said yes and then made them earn it, like some kind of probationary engagement. Only my dad got it. Told me that someone who cheats and then tries to lock you down with a ring isn't someone who's actually sorry. They're just someone who's afraid of losing their safety net. I moved out the following week, found a studio across town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Started untangling our finances, which was a nightmare because we'd merged everything. Joint checking, joint savings, my name on their car loan, their name on my student loan refinance. Every day was another reminder of how intertwined we'd become, how much trust it takes to build that kind of life with someone. They texted constantly at first, long paragraphs about how they were going to therapy, how they'd learned so much about themselves, how they understood now what they'd thrown away. They'd send me songs, photos of places we'd been together, screenshots of things that reminded them of me. I stopped responding, muted the conversation, tried to move forward. That's when everything unraveled. Mutual friends started picking sides. Some thought I was being too harsh, that people make mistakes and deserve second chances. Others were firmly Team Emma. Couldn't believe my partner had the audacity to propose after cheating. Our friend group basically split down the middle, made every social event awkward and terrible. I found out through one of those friends that my ex had never actually stopped talking to Jordan. The whole therapy thing, the proposal, the grand gesture, all of it happened while they were still in contact. They'd just gotten better at hiding it. Apparently Jordan had been at the Overlook that night, watching from the parking lot, waiting to see what I'd say. When I said no, they left together. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's get back to what happened when Emma walked away from that ring. Learning that broke something in me that I didn't know could still break. I'd thought maybe they really were sorry, really did want to fix things, and I was just too hurt to see it. Finding out the whole thing was theatre, while they maintained their other relationship, made me feel like an idiot. Like I'd been played twice. I blocked them. Blocked Jordan. Blocked anyone who I thought might feed information back to either of them. I deleted social media for 3 months. Couldn't handle seeing their posts or mutual friends tagging us in memories. Just went dark and focused on rebuilding. It's been almost a year now. I'm in therapy, working through trust issues and the gaslighting I didn't even realize was happening. My therapist helped me see all the ways they'd manipulated situations to make me doubt myself, twisted things to avoid accountability. The crying, the grand gestures, even the proposal, all of it was about controlling the narrative and keeping me locked in. They still text sometimes, usually late at night, usually drunk based on the typos, asking if I've reconsidered, if I ever think about what we had, if there's any chance. I never respond. There's nothing left to say. I'm dating again, slowly. It's hard. Every time someone's phone buzzes, I tense up. Every time plans change last minute, I assume the worst. I'm working on it, trying to trust that not everyone operates like my ex. But it's a process. Some days are better than others. The weirdest part is occasionally seeing their posts through friends who haven't caught on that I don't want updates. They're with Jordan now, publicly, posting couple photos and inside jokes. The same person they swore meant nothing. Part of me wants to feel vindicated. Like, see, I was right to walk away. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of how much space they still take up in my head. How much of my energy goes into healing from something I never asked for. I don't regret saying no. Not for a second. A ring doesn't fix betrayal. Marriage doesn't erase 8 months of lies. And someone who proposes while still maintaining contact with the person they cheated with isn't someone who's actually changed. They're just someone who's desperate not to face consequences. I'm building a new life now. Different routines, different coffee shop, different Saturday morning rituals. It's quieter, simpler, just me figuring out who I am outside of that relationship. And honestly, it's not so bad. Turns out you can survive having your heart broken and your trust shattered. You just come out the other side a little more careful about who you give those things to. Their family still thinks I'm cruel. Let them. I'd rather be cruel than spend my life wondering when the next lie is coming. But while Emma was untangling herself from one toxic relationship, Marcus was discovering his partner had been living a double life that made her situation look simple. For months, my partner was stressed. At least that's what they kept telling me. Late nights at the office, coming home exhausted, barely able to hold a conversation before collapsing into bed. I'd ask how their day was and get one-word answers. I'd suggest we do something together on the weekend, and they'd snap at me, say they needed space to decompress. The mood swings were getting worse too, going from affectionate to cold within the same evening, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I tried to be understanding. I really did. Work can be brutal. I get it. So I picked up more of the household stuff, made sure dinner was ready when they got home, tried to create a calm environment where they could relax. But nothing seemed to help. If anything, they just got more distant, more protective of their phone, taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom, tilting the screen away from me when we sat on the couch, getting irritated if I asked who they were texting. When I brought it up gently, they accused me of being paranoid, said I was adding to their stress by not trusting them, that their job was demanding and I was making it worse by being clingy and insecure. And because I didn't want to be that person, the suspicious controlling partner, I backed off, told myself I was overreacting, that they just needed support and patience. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was looking for my headphones, the good noise-cancelling ones I use at the gym. Thought I'd left them in my bag, but they weren't there. My partner and I have basically identical gym bags. Same brand, same color, easy to mix up. So I grabbed theirs from the closet and unzipped the front pocket. That's when I found it. A second phone. Not their usual iPhone, this was an older Android in a plain black case, tucked into the small inner pocket. For a second I just stared at it, confused. Why would they need 2 phones? Maybe it was a work thing. But they'd never mentioned having a separate work device. I picked it up. The screen lit up, unlocked, no password. And right there, open on the screen, was a text conversation with someone named Alex. The most recent message was from that morning. Can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you so much yesterday. My hands went cold. I scrolled up. The messages went back months, 8 months of constant communication. Good morning texts, good night texts, inside jokes I wasn't part of, selfies, flirty banter that escalated into explicit messages about what they wanted to do to each other, plans to meet for dinner at restaurants I'd been suggesting we try together, complaints about me, about how suffocating I was, how they felt trapped. There were I love yous, actual I love yous, exchanged casually like they'd been saying it for months. Maybe they had been. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Just sat there on the bedroom floor, scrolling through months of proof that the person I lived with, the person I was planning a future with, had been living an entirely separate life. Every late night at work, every time they said they were too stressed to talk, every mood swing I'd blamed myself for. It all made horrible sense now. But that wasn't even the worst part. I opened the calendar app synced to the phone. There were events marked as busy, blocked off time that looked professional enough, but when I clicked on them, they were hotel reservations, dozens of them over the past 8 months. I cross-referenced the dates in my head with the nights they'd said they were working late, or grabbing drinks with colleagues or dealing with a family emergency. Every single one matched up. The timestamps on the messages showed late-night calls that lasted hours, times when I was asleep in our bed and they were in the living room, supposedly watching TV or catching up on work emails. The hotel receipts showed check-ins on nights they'd claimed to be staying late at the office for a big project deadline. They'd never gotten physical. That's what they'd said during those first few horrible hours after I confronted them. Just emotional support, just someone to talk to during a stressful time, nothing more. But here was the evidence, time-stamped and geotagged, proving that was just another lie. I heard the front door open. They were home early, calling out to ask if I wanted to order dinner. I walked out of the bedroom with the phone in my hand. The look on their face when they saw what I was holding, that split second of pure panic before they tried to compose themselves, that's something I'll never forget. They lunged for it, actually tried to grab it out of my hands like a kid caught with something they shouldn't have. I held it away and asked, very calmly considering I felt like my entire world was imploding, who Alex was. The excuses came fast. It wasn't what it looked like. I was taking things out of context. It was just a friend, someone from their gym who they'd gotten close to, someone who understood what they were going through. The stress at work was real, and they'd needed someone to talk to, and it had just gotten out of hand. They swore it was only emotional, that they'd never actually done anything physical, that it meant nothing compared to what we had. I held up the phone and started reading hotel confirmation numbers out loud. Watched their face go from defensive to defeated in real time. They sat down on the couch, put their head in their hands, and started crying, said they were sorry, that they'd made a terrible mistake, that they never meant for it to go this far, that it started innocent and just spiraled and they didn't know how to stop it. I asked them how long they'd been planning to keep lying to me. If I hadn't found the phone, would they have ever told me? They didn't answer, just kept crying, kept saying they were sorry, kept asking me not to leave. I told them to pack a bag. They needed to stay somewhere else while I figured out what to do next. They begged me to reconsider, said we could work through this, that couples therapy could help, that throwing away our relationship over one mistake was insane. I pointed out that 8 months of sustained lying and cheating wasn't one mistake. It was a choice they made every single day. And here's where it gets absurd. They left finally after 2 hours of back and forth, went to stay with a friend, or maybe with Alex for all I know, and within days our mutual friends started reaching out, but not to check on me, to tell me they'd heard about our breakup and wanted to hear my side because my partner had told them I'd invaded their privacy, gone through their personal belongings without permission, and destroyed the relationship over baseless jealousy and insecurity. The narrative they'd spun was incredible. According to them, I'd found some innocent messages with a friend, completely misinterpreted them, and kicked them out without even trying to communicate. They were the victim of my controlling behavior and trust issues. Several friends actually lectured me about respecting boundaries and not letting paranoia ruin a good thing. I was so angry I couldn't even see straight. Part of me wanted to send the screenshots to everyone, prove that I wasn't crazy, show them exactly what kind of person they were defending. But the other part of me was just exhausted. Tired of fighting, tired of explaining, tired of defending my decision to people who should have known me better than to believe I'd blow up my life over nothing. I blocked my partner on everything: phone, social media, email, all of it. Then I started blocking the friends who clearly weren't actually my friends, the ones who'd taken their side without even asking for my perspective. If they wanted to believe I was some paranoid, jealous monster, let them. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Started therapy the following week. Needed someone objective to help me process what had happened, to untangle the gaslighting from reality. Because that's what it was: months of gaslighting. Making me feel crazy for noticing their distance. Making me feel guilty for being concerned about their behavior. Turning my reasonable questions into character flaws. My therapist helped me see the patterns I'd missed, the way they'd deflect instead of reassure, the way they'd turn things around so I was always the problem, the way they'd use their supposed stress as a shield against any accountability. I'd been so focused on being supportive that I'd ignored every red flag waving in my face. It's been 6 months now. I'm doing better. Mostly. Some days are harder than others. I'll see something that reminds me of them, or I'll catch myself wondering what they're doing, if they're still with Alex, if they ever actually felt bad about what they did. Then I remember the hotel receipts and the "I love yous" and the way they tried to make me the villain, and I'm just glad I found that phone when I did. I heard through the grapevine that they're engaged now. To Alex, presumably, though I didn't ask for details and don't want to know. Good for them, I guess. They deserve each other. Someone who cheats with you will cheat on you. That's what people say, right? Maybe Alex will find a second phone in a gym bag someday too. That's their problem now, not mine. I'm rebuilding, learning to trust my instincts again instead of talking myself out of them. Dating slowly, carefully, probably too carefully if I'm honest, but I'd rather be overly cautious than ignore obvious signs because I want to believe the best in someone. Been there, done that, got the emotional scars to prove it. The friends who believed their version without question, who took their side and lectured me about privacy and trust, I don't talk to them anymore. Real friends ask questions. Real friends know your character well enough to pause before accepting a story that paints you as unhinged. The ones worth keeping reached out, listened, and didn't need me to justify protecting myself. I kept the second phone, actually. Sounds weird, but it's in a drawer in my desk. Sometimes when I'm doubting myself, when I'm wondering if I overreacted or threw away something good, I look at it. Remember that I'm not crazy, that what happened was real. That trusting someone who lies to your face every day isn't loyalty, it's just denial. My partner blamed stress until I found the evidence they couldn't explain away. Then they blamed me for finding it. That tells you everything you need to know about who they really were. Sometimes the people who hurt you most aren't romantic partners. They're the family who raised you and then weaponized your trust in the worst possible way, just like what happened to Jasmine. I had great credit at 23, like genuinely pristine credit, 782 the last time I checked, which I know because I was obsessive about monitoring it. I'd gotten my first credit card at 18, used it responsibly, paid off the balance every month without fail, never missed a student loan payment, never carried debt I couldn't handle. My friends thought I was paranoid, but I had goals. I wanted to buy a house before I turned 25. I wanted financial stability, so I was careful. Then the calls started. Debt collectors, aggressive ones, demanding payment on a business loan I'd never heard of. At first, I thought it was a scam. I'd get these voicemails saying I owed $45,000 on a defaulted loan, that legal action was being considered, that I needed to call back immediately. I ignored them, blocked the numbers, figured it was just another phishing scheme trying to scare people into giving up their information. But they kept coming. Different numbers, different collection agencies, all saying the same thing. Finally, I answered one, told them they had the wrong person, that I'd never taken out a business loan in my life. The guy on the other end rattled off my social security number, my date of birth, my address from 3 years ago. Said the loan had been originated when I was 20, that it had been in default for 18 months, and that I owed the full amount, plus penalties and interest. I felt sick, asked them to send me documentation, proof that this was real. It arrived 2 days later, a loan application with my name on it, my social security number, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. Close, but not quite right. The loan was for something called Jensen Consulting Services. My last name is Jensen, my parents' last name. I called my mum first, hands shaking, trying to keep my voice steady, asked her if she knew anything about a business loan in my name. There was this long pause on the other end, too long. Then she said, in this defensive tone, that they needed help getting their business started, that their credit wasn't good enough to qualify on their own, that they'd planned to pay it back before I ever found out. They'd used my social security number, forged my signature, taken out a $45,000 loan when I was 20 years old without asking me, without telling me, and then just let it default when their business idea didn't work out. For 3 years, this loan had been sitting there, destroying my credit, and they'd said nothing. I drove to their house that same day. My dad was there too, sitting at the kitchen table like nothing was wrong. I asked them how they could do this, how they could steal my identity, ruin my credit, and just act like it was no big deal. My mum started crying immediately, said I was being cruel. That family helps each other, that they'd been struggling and I was selfish for making it about money instead of understanding what they were going through. My dad backed her up, said I should have known they needed help, that if I'd been paying attention to their lives instead of being so focused on myself, I would have offered to help before it got to this point. They were turning it around on me, making me the bad guy for being upset that they'd committed fraud. I asked them about my mortgage application. I'd been pre-approved, had found a small starter house, was supposed to close in 6 weeks. They looked confused, said they didn't know I was buying a house. I pointed out that maybe if they'd asked before using my identity, they would have known. My mom said I never tell them anything about my life, which is rich considering what they'd done. But that wasn't even the worst part. My siblings got involved. I have an older brother and a younger sister, both of whom apparently knew about the loan. Not the specifics, but they knew our parents had used my information for something financial, and neither of them had thought to warn me. When I called my brother, furious, he said I was overreacting, that mom and dad had been desperate, that their business idea would have worked if they'd had more time, that I should be helping them figure out how to fix this instead of being angry. My sister was worse, told me I should have known they were struggling financially, that I was the one with good credit and a stable job, so obviously I should have been helping them, said I was selfish for caring more about my credit score than my own parents. Like those two things were remotely comparable. I contacted a lawyer, explained the situation, showed them the documentation. They told me I had 2 options. I could pay off the debt myself, which would take years and cost me everything I'd saved, or I could file a police report for identity theft. The second option would clear my name, but would likely result in criminal charges against my parents. The lawyer said most people in my situation choose to pay it themselves, that family pressure usually wins out over legal justice. But I kept thinking about my mortgage application, about the denial letter I'd received the day before, insufficient credit history, too much outstanding debt. I'd lost the house because of what they'd done, lost my chance at the future I'd been working toward. And here's where it gets absurd. I filed the police report, gave them everything, the loan documents, the forged signature, proof that I was never involved in the business. My parents found out within a week. My mum called me sobbing, saying I was trying to send them to jail, that she couldn't believe her own daughter would do this to her. My dad sent me an email, all in caps, calling me a traitor and saying I was dead to them. My siblings stopped speaking to me entirely. My brother sent one final text saying I'd destroyed the family over money, that I was selfish and vindictive, and that he wanted nothing to do with me. My sister blocked me on everything without a word. Thanksgiving came around a few months later. I didn't go, obviously. My mum apparently spent the entire dinner crying, telling extended family that I was prosecuting them, that I was trying to ruin their lives over a misunderstanding. Aunts and uncles I barely knew started calling me, trying to convince me to drop the charges. Said family forgives family, that what my parents did was wrong, but sending them to jail was worse. Nobody seemed to care that they'd stolen my identity, that they'd destroyed my credit, that they'd cost me a house and probably years of financial recovery. It was all about poor mom and dad who'd made a mistake, and now their ungrateful daughter was punishing them for it. The police investigation moved slowly. I had to provide statements, documentation, proof that I'd never been involved in their business. The detective assigned to my case seemed sympathetic, but kept asking if I really wanted to press charges. said these family cases were complicated. I told him I wanted my name cleared, whatever that took. Then came the breaking point. My mortgage lender contacted me about the investigation, said that until the loan was officially cleared from my credit report, which could take months or even years, I wouldn't qualify for another home loan. The detective told me that even if charges were filed, getting the loan removed from my credit history was a separate process that could take forever. I was looking at years of bad credit, years of rebuilding, all because my parents thought they were entitled to use my identity as collateral for their failed business. My parents ended up taking a plea deal: probation, restitution, community service. No jail time, which honestly felt like they got off easy. The restitution payments are supposed to go toward paying off the loan, but they're minimal. I'm still dealing with collection agencies, still fighting to get this cleared from my credit report. It's been over a year and my score has only climbed to 610. I haven't spoken to my parents since I filed the report. My siblings still won't talk to me. Extended family has mostly taken their side, saying I went too far. A few cousins reached out privately to say they understood why I did it, but publicly everyone acts like I'm the villain in this story. The hardest part is how many people think I should have just paid it off and moved on. Friends who heard what happened and said things like, "But they're your parents," as if that makes identity theft acceptable. Co-workers who suggested I should have handled it privately, like there was some family meeting that could have resolved $45,000 in fraudulent debt. I'm in therapy now, working through the betrayal and the guilt they tried to pile on me. My therapist keeps reminding me that what they did was illegal, that filing a police report wasn't vindictive, it was protecting myself. Some days I believe her. Other days I wonder if I should have just eaten the cost and maintained the relationship. But then I think about my mortgage application, about the future they stole from me without asking, without caring, about how they were perfectly willing to let me discover this debt on my own, probably years down the line when the damage was already irreversible. They made their choice when they forged my signature. I just made mine when I refused to cover for them. My credit is slowly recovering. I'm saving again, though it'll be years before I can qualify for a mortgage. I've had to explain the situation to potential landlords, to banks, to anyone who runs my credit and sees the mess. It's humiliating every single time. People ask if I regret it, filing the report. I don't think regret is the right word. I regret that it happened at all. I regret that my parents thought so little of me that they'd destroy my financial future for a business idea that failed. I regret that my siblings chose their side without even asking for mine. But I don't regret protecting myself, even if it cost me my family. They're the ones who used my name. I'm just the one who refused to let them get away with it. And if you think parents are the only ones capable of that kind of betrayal, wait until you hear what happened to Devon when her so-called best friend pulled the ultimate con. My best friend since college called me one night, completely hysterical. I could barely understand her through the sobbing. Something about her landlord, eviction notices, losing her job. She said she needed $1,800 by the end of the week, or she'd be homeless. $1,800 she didn't have because she'd been let go from her marketing job 3 weeks earlier and hadn't told anyone because she was embarrassed. I didn't even hesitate. We'd been friends for almost a decade. She'd been there for me through breakups, family drama, my own job loss 2 years prior. When someone you love is in crisis, you help them. That's what friends do. I logged into my bank account, transferred the money from my savings, and texted her a screenshot. Told her not to worry about paying me back right away, to just focus on getting back on her feet. She was so grateful, sent me paragraphs about how I'd saved her life, how she didn't know what she would have done without me, how she'd pay me back as soon as she found work. I told her to take her time. Money was tight for me too, but I could make it work. I'd just be more careful with spending for a while. A month later, she called again. Same panic, same tears. The landlord needed next month's rent and she still hadn't found a job. The market was brutal. She'd had a few interviews, but nothing had panned out. She needed another $1,800. I looked at my bank account, did the mental math of my own bills, and sent it. What else was I supposed to do? Let my best friend end up on the street? This became the pattern. Every month, like clockwork, she'd call or text in a panic about rent. Sometimes she'd add details about job interviews that fell through, or promising leads that didn't work out, or how depressed she was about the whole situation. I kept sending money, $1,800 a month for 6 months, nearly $11,000 total, which I know because I started tracking it after the third month. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed to budget my own life around helping her. I was eating ramen and eggs most nights, skipping social events because I couldn't afford the drinks or the cover charges, telling other friends I was busy when really, I just didn't have the money to go out. My own savings account, which I'd spent years building up for emergencies, or maybe a down payment someday, was completely drained. But I told myself it was worth it. I was keeping my best friend housed. That mattered more than my social life or my savings goals. She'd post on Instagram occasionally, always with captions about staying positive during hard times, about gratitude and resilience. I'd comment supportive things, heart emojis. You've got this kind of messages. Her photos were always taken at home, mostly selfies or pictures of her coffee. Nothing that suggested she was doing anything other than struggling to get by. Then I ran into someone we both knew from college at a coffee shop. We got to talking, catching up on life. She mentioned our mutual friend, said something about how smart she was for buying that condo young and house hacking it. I must have looked confused because she kept talking, explaining how our friend had bought the place 2 years ago, had a roommate paying rent to help cover the mortgage, the whole setup. I went cold, asked her to repeat what she'd said. She did, adding that she wished she'd been smart enough to invest in property that young, that our friend was really savvy with money. I nodded, said something non-committal, and left as soon as I could without seeming weird. Sat in my car in the parking lot and pulled up the county property records on my phone. Public information, easy to search, and there it was, my best friend's name on a condo purchased 26 months ago. She owned the place, owned it. There was no landlord, no eviction threat, no rent she couldn't afford. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went back through her Instagram with fresh eyes. Those coffee photos, taken at trendy cafes I recognized from the bougie part of town, the selfies at home, designer throw pillows in the background that definitely weren't there the last time I'd visited. And then I scrolled back further to posts from 4 and 5 months ago that I'd somehow missed or not paid attention to at the time. Beach vacation, wine tasting weekend, concert tickets to shows that cost hundreds of dollars, all while she was supposedly struggling to make rent, all while I was sending her $1,800 a month. The dates lined up perfectly. I'd send her rent money, and within a week or two, there'd be a new post from some expensive restaurant or weekend trip. She was using my money to fund her lifestyle while I ate dollar store pasta and cancelled plans. I felt like the biggest idiot alive. How had I not seen this? How had I not questioned why someone who couldn't afford rent was posting pictures from Napa Valley? But she'd been so convincing on those phone calls, so genuinely upset and stressed. Or at least, I'd thought it was genuine. I called her that night, told her I knew about the condo. There was this long pause, and then she laughed. Actually laughed. Said she didn't know what I was talking about. I told her I'd looked up the property records, that I knew she'd bought the place 2 years ago, that there was no landlord threatening eviction. Another pause, and then her whole tone changed. She got defensive, said I was being weird and invasive, looking up her property records like some kind of stalker, that her financial situation was complicated and I didn't understand. I asked her to explain it then. To explain how she needed my rent money when she owned the place. She said she had a mortgage to pay, that owning wasn't the same as having it paid off, that she still needed help making the payments. I asked about the roommate. She went quiet. I asked about the vacations, the restaurants, the concert tickets. She said those were gifts from family, or work expenses from before she lost her job, or none of my business, that I'd offered to help and she'd never lied to me. Technically, she said she'd never claimed to have a landlord. She'd just said she needed help with housing costs. The mental gymnastics were impressive, honestly. I asked for my money back, all of it, nearly $11,000 that I'd sent her in good faith while she played me for a fool. She scoffed, said I'd given it as a gift, that there was no written agreement to pay it back, that I couldn't just demand it back because I decided to be petty about how she spent it. I told her we were done, that the friendship was over, that what she'd done was manipulative and cruel. She said I was overreacting, that real friends help each other without keeping score, and that if I was going to be like this, then fine. She didn't need a friend who threw money in her face the second things got complicated. Then she hung up on me. I texted her one more time, asked again for my money back, said I was serious. She blocked me, blocked my number, blocked me on all social media, just completely cut me off. I sat there staring at my phone, at the messages that wouldn't deliver, trying to process that my best friend of almost 10 years had stolen from me and then blocked me for calling her out. And here's where it gets absurd. I filed a small claims lawsuit, gathered every transaction receipt, every text message where she'd asked for rent help, every bit of documentation I could find. She'd said it was a gift, but the messages clearly showed her, promising to pay me back once she got back on her feet. That's a loan, not a gift. She didn't even show up to the first hearing, just didn't appear. The judge asked if I'd served her properly. I had. Certified mail, signature required, the whole deal. We rescheduled. She didn't show up to the second hearing either. The judge ruled in my favor by default, ordered her to pay back the full amount plus court costs. Getting her to actually pay was another nightmare. She ignored the judgment for months. I had to file for wage garnishment, which required finding out where she worked. Turned out she'd had a job the entire time, never been unemployed at all. That was just another lie. Her wages started getting garnished, a few $100s per paycheck, which at that rate would take years to repay everything. Mutual friends reached out, some taking her side, saying I was being vindictive and petty, that suing your best friend over money was a horrible thing to do. A few others quietly admitted they'd suspected something was off, but hadn't wanted to get involved. One friend confessed that our so-called best friend had tried the same thing with her 2 years earlier, a smaller amount, and she'd just written it off as a loss rather than deal with the confrontation. The friendship was dead long before the lawsuit concluded. Honestly, it died the moment she laughed when I confronted her, when she tried to twist the situation to make me the bad guy for catching her in a lie. Real friends don't manipulate you out of thousands of dollars while you're eating ramen to afford helping them. I got most of my money back eventually, though it took almost 2 years of garnishment. But the financial loss wasn't even the worst part. It was realizing that someone I'd trusted completely, someone I'd have done anything for, saw me as an easy mark, a source of funding for her lifestyle while she played the struggling victim. I'm more careful now about helping people financially. Not cynical exactly, but definitely more skeptical. I ask more questions, I verify stories. I set clear boundaries about what help looks like and what the expectations are. Maybe that makes me less generous, less trusting. But it also means I won't spend another year funding someone's vacation fund while they cry about being homeless. She tried to friend request me on social media about 6 months after the judgment, like nothing had happened. I deleted it. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, especially when the other person burned them down and then sent you the bill for the matches. Friendship betrayals sting, but workplace deception? That hits different when your livelihood is on the line, which is exactly what happened to Kyle. When my boss introduced Jake as our new intern, I was genuinely excited. I'd been at the company for 5 years, knew the systems inside and out, and had been asking for help for months. Our department was slammed, clients were piling up, and I was working 60-hour weeks just to keep up. An extra pair of hands, even inexperienced ones, felt like a lifeline. Jake seemed perfect for the role, enthusiastic, polite, asked intelligent questions. My boss said he was fresh out of school, eager to learn the industry, and that I'd be his primary mentor. I took that responsibility seriously. I walked him through everything: client protocols, our proprietary database system, the shortcuts I'd developed over years of trial and error that made workflows faster. I showed him how to handle difficult clients, which managers preferred, what communication styles, the unwritten rules that make or break success in our field. He was a great student, took detailed notes, stayed late to practice the systems, sent me thank you messages for my time. We'd grab coffee in the mornings and I'd answer his questions about career development, office politics, how I'd built my client relationships. He seemed genuinely grateful for the guidance, said he couldn't believe how much he was learning, that he'd lucked out getting placed with someone so willing to teach. I introduced him to my clients, brought him to meetings so he could observe, started letting him take smaller tasks, then bigger ones as he proved himself capable. By month 2, he was handling some of my mid-tier accounts independently. My boss seemed pleased with his progress, would stop by to check on how the mentorship was going. I always said Jake was doing great, that he was picking things up faster than I'd expected. Looking back, I should have noticed the weird questions. Like when Jake asked about my salary range, said he was trying to understand career trajectory in the field, or when he wanted to know exactly which clients generated the most revenue, Or when he asked if I'd ever considered moving to a different company. I thought he was just curious, trying to learn the business side of things. I answered honestly because I had no reason not to trust him. 3 months in, my boss called me into his office. The HR director was there too, which should have been my first clue something was wrong. They said the company was restructuring, that they'd evaluated department needs and made some difficult decisions. My role was being eliminated. Eliminated, not reduced, not modified, gone. I sat there in shock while they explained that my position no longer aligned with company goals, that they were moving in a different direction, strategically. I asked what that meant for me, if there was another role I could transition into. They said no. Budget constraints, shifting priorities, all the corporate speak that means you're fired, but they don't want to say it. Then my boss said they were creating a new position, a senior account strategist role that would handle high-level client relations and system optimization, and they were promoting Jake into it. Jake, the intern I'd spent 3 months training, the kid who was supposedly fresh out of school and learning the ropes. I must have looked as confused as I felt because the HR director jumped in, explained that Jake wasn't actually an intern. He had a master's degree in business and over 10 years of industry experience. They'd brought him in specifically to transition into this new role, but thought it would be easier if he learned our systems and clients from someone who knew them well first. Easier. They'd used the word easier like this was a minor administrative decision and not a complete betrayal. I'd trained my own replacement, spent 3 months teaching someone with more experience and education than me everything I knew, introducing him to my clients, giving him access to my workflows, all while he and my boss knew exactly what was happening. And I'd had no idea. I asked why they lied. Why not just tell me they were hiring someone for a senior role and have me train them as part of a transition? The HR director said intern was just simpler than explaining the full situation. That they didn't want to create anxiety or affect my performance during the transition period. Like lying to my face for 3 months was somehow the considerate choice. My boss added that Jake's position came with a higher salary than I'd been making, that it was a different level of role, more strategic responsibility. I pointed out that the responsibilities he listed were exactly what I'd been doing for years. He said the new structure was different. I didn't bother arguing. What was the point? They offered me 2 weeks severance, 2 weeks for 5 years of work. I'd built half their client relationships from scratch, had consistently exceeded my targets, had trained countless people, including apparently my own replacement. 2 weeks, but that wasn't even the worst part. I had to go back to my desk and pack up while Jake sat 20 feet away, already moved into the workspace they'd set up for his new role. He didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge what had happened, just kept working on his computer like nothing was wrong. When I walked past with my box of personal items, he looked up and said, good luck, like I was leaving by choice. I cleaned out my desk in a fog. 5 years of awards, client thank you notes, the small personal items that accumulate when you spend more waking hours at work than at home. My coworkers didn't know what to say. A few hugged me, whispered that it was messed up, promised to stay in touch. Most just looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. The 2-week severance didn't even cover a month of rent. I filed for unemployment, started sending out resumes immediately, reached out to former colleagues, activated every professional network I had, and I made a list of every client contact I'd built relationships with over the years. Not company property exactly, just people I'd worked with who knew and trusted me. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 job offers. Took the one at a direct competitor, a company I'd turned down years earlier when I was loyal to my old firm. They were thrilled to have someone with my client knowledge and system expertise, gave me a better title and 20% more than I'd been making. Then I started making calls, reached out to my former clients, the ones I'd brought in personally, the relationships I'd nurtured, explained I'd moved to a new firm and would love to continue working with them if they were open to it. Kept it professional, didn't badmouth my old company, just let them know where I'd landed. 3 of the biggest accounts moved with me within the first month. These were 6-figure contracts, major revenue generators. I'd built those relationships over years. The clients trusted me, not the company. When they found out I'd been let go, they weren't particularly loyal to a firm that would eliminate the person who'd been managing their business. And here's where it gets absurd. My old boss called me personally, not to apologize or check how I was doing, to ask me to stop poaching their clients, said it was unethical, that I was damaging the company. I reminded him that these were relationships I'd built, clients who chose to follow me, that if he'd valued my work, maybe he should have thought about that before replacing me with someone he'd lied about being an intern. He threatened legal action. I told him to have his lawyers call me, that I'd done nothing illegal, and we both knew it. Client relationships aren't company property unless there's a non-compete, which I'd never signed. He sputtered something about professional courtesy and hung up. 2 more clients switched within the next 3 months. My new company was ecstatic. I'd brought in nearly $500,000 in annual contracts and proven I could deliver the same quality work. Got a promotion within 6 months, a salary increase that put me well above what I'd been making before. I heard through former co-workers that Jake was struggling. Turns out knowing systems and having experience doesn't replace the relationships I'd spent years building. Clients were formal with him, polite but distant. Some were openly frustrated that I was gone. The accounts that stayed started reducing their contracts, moving smaller projects in-house or to other vendors. My old boss got demoted. The department missed its revenue targets 2 quarters in a row, largely because of the clients who'd left. The company restructured again, eliminated his role. I'd like to say I felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. The whole situation was such a waste. Jake sent me a LinkedIn message about 8 months after I left. Said he understood if I didn't want to talk, but he wanted to apologize. That he'd been told the transition was standard procedure. That he didn't realize how unfair it was until he was dealing with the fallout. I didn't respond. Maybe he was genuine. Maybe he was trying to rebuild bridges for professional reasons. Either way, I didn't owe him closure. I'm doing well now. Better job, better pay, better company culture that doesn't think lying to employees is easier than honesty. I don't trust mentorship situations the same way anymore, which is probably healthy but also a little sad. I'm more careful about what I share and with whom. The experience taught me that loyalty to a company is a one-way street, unless you're very lucky. That you can do everything right and still get burned because someone decided your role was inconvenient, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic. It's just being better at your job than they gave you credit for and letting them realize what they lost after it's too late. At least Kyle saw that betrayal coming eventually, but some ambushes disguised themselves as celebrations, like what Priya walked into on her birthday. I thought my friends were throwing me a surprise 30th birthday party. That's what the texts had hinted at all week. Cryptic messages about keeping Saturday night free, asking what kind of cake I liked, whether I preferred wine or cocktails. My best friend Sarah had been weirdly insistent that I come straight home from work that day, not make any other plans. I figured they were planning something sweet, maybe a little gathering at my apartment since I hadn't been up for going out much lately. I'd been struggling since my dad died 8 months earlier. Not hiding it either. I'd been pretty open with my friends about having a hard time, about how grief was hitting me in waves, how some days were better than others. They'd seemed understanding at first. Sympathetic texts, offers to talk if I needed to. But over the past few months, I'd noticed them pulling back a bit. Fewer invitations, shorter conversations, a general sense that I was becoming optional in the group. I figured they were just busy. People have their own lives, and honestly, I hadn't been the most fun person to be around. I'd cancelled plans when the sadness felt too heavy. I'd been quieter at group dinners, not really up for the usual gossip and jokes. I was just trying to survive each day, get through work, process losing the person who'd been my biggest supporter my entire life. So when I walked into my apartment that Saturday evening and saw balloons and a cake on the counter, my first reaction was gratitude. They'd remembered. They cared enough to do something special, even though I'd been kind of a mess lately. Then I actually looked at the room. 12 people sitting in a circle in my living room. My furniture had been rearranged. Faces that should have been smiling looked somber, serious. Nobody yelled surprise. Nobody moved to hug me. Sarah stood up and asked me to sit down, said they needed to talk to me about something important. I sat, confused, looking around at friends I'd known for years. College roommates, co-workers who'd become close, people I'd celebrated birthdays and promotions and breakups with. The energy was all wrong. This wasn't a party. And then Sarah said it. They were here because they cared about me, because they were worried, because they needed to have an honest conversation about my behavior lately. An intervention. They'd organized an intervention on my birthday, using the pretense of a party to ambush me in my own home. Sarah went first, said I'd become distant and negative, that every conversation turned into something heavy and depressing, that when they tried to cheer me up or change the subject, I got defensive. My friend Monica jumped in, said I was exhausting to be around, that they felt like they had to walk on eggshells, that my grief was affecting the whole group dynamic. Others chimed in with their complaints. I'd bailed on too many plans. I wasn't making an effort anymore. I brought down the vibe at gatherings. They understood I was sad about my dad. They really did. But it had been 8 months and I needed to start moving forward, to get professional help instead of dumping on them, to work through my issues privately so I could be a better friend. I just sat there, trying to process what was happening. These people who I'd trusted, who I'd been vulnerable with about the hardest thing I'd ever gone through, had apparently been group chatting about how inconvenient my sadness was, had decided collectively that my grief had an expiration date and I'd exceeded it, had planned this coordinated confrontation disguised as a birthday celebration. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sarah pulled out a printed list, actual bullet points of my problematic behaviors, times I'd cried at brunch, conversations where I'd mentioned missing my dad, social events I'd left early because I was overwhelmed. She documented my grief like it was evidence in a case against me. Someone else brought up that I'd stopped posting happy photos on social media, that my Instagram had become depressing. Another friend said I needed to think about how my attitude was affecting everyone else. That friendship was a two-way street, and lately I'd only been taking, not giving. I looked around the circle at these faces, people I'd shown up for over the years. I'd helped Monica move twice. I'd stayed up all night with Sarah when her boyfriend cheated. I'd thrown elaborate birthday parties and remembered anniversaries and been the friend who always showed up. But 8 months of visible grief was apparently too much to handle. I stood up, told them all to leave. My voice was surprisingly calm, which seemed to confuse them. Sarah tried to say they were doing this because they loved me, because they wanted to help. I cut her off, said that if they'd wanted to help, they could have asked how I was doing individually, could have offered support instead of judgment, could have literally done anything other than ambush me on my birthday, with a list of complaints about my dead father making me sad. They didn't move at first, just sat there looking uncomfortable. I walked to the door and opened it, repeated that they needed to leave. Now. Monica got up first, huffy, said they were just trying to be good friends. I didn't respond, just held the door while they filed out, some looking guilty, others indignant. Sarah was the last one out, tried to hug me. I stepped back. She said we could talk when I'd calmed down, that I was being defensive and proving their point. I closed the door in her face, and here's where it gets absurd. I stood in my living room surrounded by birthday decorations, purchased for a party that was actually an ambush, and I started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind of unhinged giggling that happens when something is so ridiculous your brain can't process it normally. They'd bought a cake. There was a cake for my intervention. I took a photo of the whole setup and texted it to my sister with the caption, "Guess what just happened?" She called immediately, furious on my behalf, came over with actual wine, and we spent the evening taking down decorations and talking about how spectacularly cruel the whole thing had been. My phone started buzzing within hours. Sarah sent a long text about how I was overreacting, that they'd put so much effort into trying to help me, and I couldn't even appreciate it. Monica sent something similar. A few others chimed in with variations of the same message. I was being too sensitive. I was proving their point by getting emotional. If I really wanted to get better, I'd listen to what they were saying. Then came the breaking point. Someone had created a group chat without me. I know because one of the people who'd been at the intervention, Jessica, accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for someone else. It was from earlier that day, hours before the intervention. They'd been coordinating who would say what, assigning talking points. Sarah had written, "We need to be firm but loving. She needs to know this is serious." They'd rehearsed it, practiced their lines about my grief being inconvenient, planned the whole performance like it was a hostile takeover instead of friends concerned about a friend. I blocked all of them, every single person who'd been in that room, blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, removed them from every digital space we'd shared. Jessica tried to apologize later, said she'd felt uncomfortable during the intervention, but hadn't known how to speak up. I blocked her too, If you stay silent while someone's being ambushed, you're part of the ambush. The next few months were lonely. I'd lost my entire friend group in one evening, but the space they left behind was actually kind of peaceful. I wasn't constantly managing other people's comfort with my grief anymore. Wasn't editing myself to be more palatable. Wasn't pretending to be okay so no one would be inconvenienced by my sadness. I started going to an actual grief support group, met people who understood that 8 months wasn't some magic deadline where you suddenly stop missing your parent, made a few genuine connections with people who didn't think supporting a friend through hard times was an unreasonable burden, joined a book club through work, started saying yes to casual hangouts with acquaintances I'd never gotten close to before because my social calendar had always been full with the old group. Slowly, carefully, I built a new circle. Smaller, but so much better. People who asked how I was doing and actually wanted to hear the answer, who understood that friendship means showing up even when it's not fun. I ran into Sarah about a year later at a coffee shop. She tried to approach me, said she'd been wanting to reach out, that maybe we could talk. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hurt, just complete indifference. Told her I wasn't interested and walked away. She sent a message later saying I was being stubborn and holding a grudge. I deleted it without responding. My 30th birthday had been one of the worst nights of my life, but in a weird way, it was also clarifying. Those people had done me a favor by showing exactly who they were, by demonstrating that their friendship was conditional on me being easy and fun and never requiring actual emotional support. I'm 32 now. My new friends threw me a birthday dinner last year. Small group, good food, genuine conversation. Someone mentioned my dad, a memory I'd shared before. Instead of changing the subject or looking uncomfortable, they engaged with it, asked questions. Let me talk about him without treating it like a burden. That's the difference. Real friends don't ambush you on your birthday with a list of ways your grief is inconvenient. They don't require you to perform happiness for their comfort. They show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Best decision I ever made was blocking every single person from that intervention and starting over. Sometimes burning it all down and rebuilding is the only way forward. Turns out families can orchestrate even more devastating surprises than friends ever could, as Daniel discovered when his brother made a decision that changed everything. When Mom died, she left the house to both of us equally, 50-50 split, legally documented in her will. My brother Ryan had been living there for the past few years, supposedly taking care of her in her final months. I lived 3 states away, had a job and a family, couldn't just uproot everything, so we'd agreed he'd stay in the house, live there rent-free, and eventually we'd figure out what to do with it. Either he'd buy out my half or we'd sell and split the proceeds. I was paying half the property taxes from across the state, half the remaining mortgage balance Mum had left. Ryan said he couldn't afford his half right then, that he was between jobs, that he'd get caught up soon. I didn't push it. He was grieving. We both were. The house had been in our family for 30 years. I had memories in every room. I wasn't in a rush to sell. Ryan kept saying he wanted to buy me out, would ask what I thought my half was worth, talk about getting a loan, mention he was working on his credit. I told him there was no rush. Take your time. Figure out your finances. I just wanted him to keep up with basic maintenance, make sure the place didn't fall apart while we sorted things out. Then, about 8 months after Mum's funeral, I got a call from a title company. Very professional woman asking about finalizing my portion of the sale, when I'd be available to come sign the closing documents. I told her she had the wrong number. She read off my name, my social security number, the property address, said my brother had listed the house 6 weeks ago and they were set to close in 3 days. I hung up and immediately called Ryan, straight to voicemail. Called again, nothing. Sent a text asking what the hell was going on with the house. No response. I called the title company back, asked them to send me all the documentation they had. The listing agreement had both our names on it, both our signatures, except I'd never signed anything, never even seen a listing agreement. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the county records. The house was in contract. Sale price $340,000. My stomach dropped. That was my inheritance. Half of that was legally mine, and Ryan had apparently sold it without telling me. He finally called back that night. Casual, like nothing was wrong. Said he'd tried to reach me about selling, but I'd been hard to get in touch with. A complete lie. We'd texted just 2 weeks earlier about something unrelated. He said the market was good and he didn't want to miss the opportunity, that he'd figured we'd split the money after closing and everything would be fine. I asked about the signature on the listing documents. He got quiet, then said his real estate agent had told him it was fine to sign for both of us since we were co-owners and I'd verbally agreed months ago. Another lie. I'd never agreed to anything, never had a single conversation about selling. I told him to cancel the sale. He said he couldn't, that they were 3 days from closing, that he'd lose the earnest money, that the buyers would sue. I said that wasn't my problem. He'd forged my signature and committed fraud. He needed to fix it immediately or I'd report it. That's when he started crying, actual tears over the phone, said he needed this money, that he had debts I didn't know about, that he'd been counting on this sale to get his life together, asked me as his brother to just let it go through, promised he'd split everything 50-50 as soon as the money hit his account. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did, but I asked him to put it in writing, send me an email confirming the sale price, and that he'd wire me my half immediately after closing. He said, of course, absolutely, he'd send it right over. Then he didn't. I followed up the next day. He said his lawyer was drafting something official. It would take a day or two. The closing happened. $340,000. I found out from the title company when they called, confused about why I hadn't shown up. Told them I was never informed of a closing date, never signed any documents, and was considering legal action. The woman sounded panicked. Said all the documents they had showed my consent and cooperation. I requested copies of everything. The forged signature on the listing agreement was just the start. There were disclosure forms, title documents, closing statements, all with my name signed in handwriting that sort of looked like mine but wasn't. Ryan had systematically forged my signature on every piece of paperwork needed to sell our mother's house and pocket the entire amount. But that wasn't even the worst part. I called him after the closing, asked where my half of the money was. He said his lawyer had advised him to hold on to it until we settled some disputes about who'd paid what over the years. Disputes, like the property taxes I'd been covering while he lived there rent-free, were somehow debatable. I told him he had 72 hours to wire me $170,000, or I was filing a police report and a lawsuit. He laughed, actually laughed, said good luck with that. That he'd already talked to a lawyer who confirmed I'd be hard-pressed to prove anything since I'd verbally agreed to the sale. I hired a lawyer that same day, cost me $3,000 just for the initial retainer. My attorney looked at everything and said we had a strong case for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, that forging signatures on real estate documents was a serious crime. We filed suit within a week. And here's where it gets absurd. Ryan started calling family members, aunts, uncles, cousins I barely talked to, told them I was suing him over Mum's house, that I was being greedy and vindictive, that he was just trying to move forward with his life, and I was dragging him through legal hell. Painted himself as the victim of his cruel older brother, who cared more about money than family. Our aunt called me crying, said I should be ashamed of myself, that Mum would be horrified to see her sons fighting like this, that Ryan had been the one taking care of her at the end, while I was off living my life across the state. I tried to explain what actually happened. She cut me off, said there were two sides to every story, and I should consider letting this go for the sake of family unity. My uncle sent me a long email about forgiveness and how suing my own brother over inheritance was tearing the family apart. Said Mum's grave was barely settled, and here we were fighting over money like vultures. I wrote back explaining the fraud, the forged signatures, the lies. He responded that maybe I had misunderstood Ryan's intentions, that family should work these things out privately. Ryan's version of events spread through our extended family like wildfire. He was the struggling younger brother trying to get back on his feet. I was the successful older sibling with plenty of money who was punishing him for making a mistake. Never mind that the mistake was systematic fraud that cost me half my inheritance. The lawsuit took 18 months. Discovery revealed that Ryan had been planning the sale for months, had consulted with a real estate agent, got the house appraised, staged it for photos, all without saying a word to me. His lawyer tried to argue that we'd had verbal agreements about selling, couldn't produce a single piece of evidence beyond Ryan's testimony. My lawyer destroyed him. We had text message records showing Ryan had never mentioned selling, email chains about other house matters with zero reference to listing it. phone records that contradicted his claims about trying to reach me. The forged signatures were examined by a handwriting expert who confirmed they weren't mine. Ryan's story fell apart piece by piece. His lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, offered me 60% of the sale proceeds if I'd drop the fraud charges. My lawyer advised we could do better. We rejected it. They came back with 70%. We rejected that too. Then came the breaking point. We went to trial. Ryan took the stand and lied under oath, said I'd told him to handle everything, that I'd been too busy with my own life to deal with the house. The prosecutor tore him apart on cross-examination, asked him to produce any documentation of these conversations. He couldn't. Asked why he'd forged signatures if I'd really agreed. He said his real estate agent had told him it was fine. We subpoenaed the agent. She denied ever saying that. The judge ruled in my favor. Full amount owed plus interest, court costs, and attorney fees. $170,000 plus another $43,000 in fees and interest. Ryan was ordered to pay within 90 days or face wage garnishment and potential criminal charges for the forgery. He didn't have it, had spent most of the money already on God knows what. His wages started getting garnished, 25% of every paycheck going directly to me until the debt was paid off. At his income level, that would take years. I got a letter from him about 6 months into the garnishment, said I'd ruined his life over money, that he hoped I was happy with myself, that Mom would be disgusted by what I'd become. I didn't respond, just filed it with all the other legal documents. It's been 4 years. I've gotten about $90,000 so far through the garnishment. He still owes over $100,000 with accumulating interest. We don't speak, don't see each other at family events because I stopped going to events where he'd be. Some family members have come around after learning the full story. Most still think I should have just let it go. That family's more important than money. But here's the thing. It was never about the money. It was about him stealing from me, lying about it, forging legal documents, and then trying to make me the villain when I held him accountable. He didn't just take my inheritance. He took my mother's house and sold it without giving me a chance to say goodbye, to walk through it one last time, to decide together what happened to the place where we grew up. He made that choice for both of us and pocketed the proceeds, then cried to anyone who'd listen about how unfair I was being. Some family members still send me messages around the holidays, suggesting we reconcile. I delete them. Ryan had multiple chances to make this right. He chose to double down at every turn. I don't regret the lawsuit. I regret that it was necessary. I regret having a brother who'd commit fraud against his own family and then play the victim. But I don't regret standing up for myself. Money or not, principle matters. And the principle here was clear. You don't get to steal from people and then act wounded when they hold you accountable, family or otherwise. But workplace disasters can rival family drama when your reputation's the casualty. Just ask Tanya about the shift she wishes she'd never covered. My coworker Sarah called me on a Friday night, completely panicked, said her sister had been in a car accident. She needed to drive upstate immediately. Could I please cover her Saturday shift? We weren't close exactly, but we were friendly. I'd worked with her for about 8 months. She'd been there for 3 years. She was crying on the phone, saying she didn't know who else to ask, that she'd owe me huge if I could help her out. I had plans that Saturday. Nothing major, just brunch with friends and errands I'd been putting off. But someone's sister was in the hospital. Of course I'd cover. I told her not to worry about it, to focus on her family, that I hoped her sister was okay. She thanked me probably 5 times, said she'd make it up to me, that I was a lifesaver. The shift itself was pretty normal. Retail on a Saturday, steady flow of customers, but nothing overwhelming. I handled transactions, restocked shelves, helped people find things. Standard stuff I'd done 100 times. Around midday, I was doing a till check like we're supposed to every few hours. The register seemed off, not by a lot, maybe $50 or $60 short, but enough that I noticed. I figured Sarah had made an error during her Friday closing shift. It happens. Sometimes you miscount change or accidentally give back too much. I made a note of it, planned to mention it to her when she got back. Didn't think much of it beyond that. The rest of the shift was fine. I closed up properly, counted everything twice, filled out the paperwork, locked up and went home. Monday morning, my manager called me into the office before my shift started. She looked serious, had this official tone that immediately put me on edge, said there'd been a significant cash shortage over the weekend and she needed to ask me some questions. I told her about the discrepancy I'd noticed, that I'd assumed it was from Friday's closing. She pulled out a report. Sarah had filed it Sunday night, apparently, claimed that when she'd done her closing count Friday, everything had balanced perfectly, that the shortage must have occurred during my Saturday shift. Said she'd reviewed the timestamps, and I'd been alone at the register during a period when $300 went missing. $300, way more than the 50 or 60 I'd noticed. I told my manager that couldn't be right, that I'd handled every transaction properly, that the register had already been short when I checked it. She looked skeptical, said Sarah had been with the company for 3 years, had never had a shortage issue, was a trusted employee. I'd been there 8 months. The implication was clear. I felt sick. I asked to see the timestamps Sarah had referenced, the specific transactions. My manager said she'd review everything and get back to me, but in the meantime I was being written up for the shortage. Written up. A formal disciplinary action that would go in my permanent file. I tried to argue to defend myself, but she cut me off, said the evidence was clear and I should be grateful I wasn't being terminated immediately. I went home that day furious and terrified. A write-up could cost me future promotions, could be used as grounds for firing me if anything else went wrong. And I hadn't done anything. I'd covered a shift as a favor and was being punished for someone else's mistake, or worse, being framed for something I didn't do. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sarah came back to work Tuesday. I tried to talk to her, to ask what had happened with the count on Friday. She looked at me like I was crazy, said she'd counted everything twice before leaving, that it had all been perfect, that she was sorry if I'd made a mistake on Saturday, but she couldn't cover for me just because we were friendly. Cover for me. Like I was the one who'd screwed up and she was being generous by not pushing for me to be fired. I told her I hadn't made any mistake, that the register had been short when I started. She gave me this pitying look and said maybe I'd miscounted, that it was easy to get confused during busy shifts. Then she walked away. I couldn't prove anything. It was her word against mine, and she had seniority and a clean record. I had a write-up and looked like someone trying to blame their mistake on someone else. I seriously considered quitting. The humiliation of being accused of theft when I'd just been trying to help someone was unbearable. Then something shifted. My manager called me in again Thursday morning, said she'd reviewed the security footage as part of standard protocol for cash shortages, asked me to come with her to the office. I thought I was getting fired, walked in there trying not to cry, already mentally drafting texts to my roommate about needing to find a new job. My manager pulled up the security footage on her computer. Friday night, about 20 minutes before closing. There was Sarah, alone at the register. She opened the till, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and pulled out a stack of bills, counted them quickly, shoved them in her purse, cool as anything. Did it twice, actually. Once around 7:30, once right before she locked up. And here's where it gets absurd. My manager fast-forwarded to Saturday, to my shift. Showed me the timestamp Sarah had claimed proved I was alone during the shortage. I wasn't alone. There were customers at the register during every single time period she'd cited. The footage completely contradicted her written report. Sarah had stolen the money Friday night, before her supposed family emergency. Then she'd filed a false report blaming me, complete with fabricated timestamps that the security footage proved were lies. She'd tried to frame me for her own theft. My manager looked exhausted. Apologized for not checking the footage before writing me up. Said she'd trusted Sarah's word because of her tenure, and that had been a mistake. The write-up would be removed from my file immediately. Sarah would be terminated as soon as she came in for her next shift. I asked about the family emergency. My manager made some calls. There was no car accident. Sarah's sister was fine, hadn't been in any accident. The whole thing had been a lie to get someone else to work Saturday, so she wouldn't be on shift when the shortage was discovered. She'd planned this, stolen the money, invented an emergency, got me to cover, and then filed a false report to pin it on me. The level of calculation was honestly impressive in the worst way. She'd thought through every angle except the one that caught her. The security cameras she knew were there, but apparently forgot actually recorded. Sarah was fired that afternoon, escorted out by security, didn't even get to clean out her locker. My manager did that later and mailed her stuff. I heard through another coworker that Sarah had tried to argue, said the footage was unclear, that there were extenuating circumstances. Didn't matter. theft and filing false accusations against another employee, both fireable offenses on their own. I thought that would be the end of it, but Sarah started posting on social media, vague rants about fake friends who stabbed you in the back, about corporate environments that didn't value loyalty, about how 3 years of good work meant nothing the second someone wanted to take you down. Never mentioned the theft, never mentioned the false report. Just positioned herself as the victim of workplace politics and betrayal. Mutual acquaintances who didn't know the full story reached out asking what happened. Some seemed to believe her version, whatever she was telling people privately. I didn't engage, didn't post my side, didn't defend myself publicly. Just let her spiral while I kept my head down and focused on work. Things went from bad to unhinged when she started tagging the company in posts about unfair termination and discrimination. The company sent her a cease and desist. She posted that too, with captions about being silenced for speaking truth. Her comments were full of people supporting her, saying corporate America was toxic, that she deserved better. It would have been funny if it wasn't so frustrating. She'd committed theft, framed a coworker, and was now playing victim on the internet. But I learned something important from the whole mess. I never covered another shift for anyone ever again. Someone calls in sick? Not my problem. Someone has an emergency? They can find someone else. I show up for my scheduled shifts, do my job, and go home. My coworkers thought I was being harsh when I started refusing. Said team players help each other out, that refusing to cover shifts made things harder for everyone. I didn't care. I'd tried being a team player. I'd tried helping someone in crisis, and I'd almost lost my job because of it. The company offered me a small raise a few months later, called it compensation for the trouble, recognition of my integrity during a difficult situation. It was nice, but didn't erase the stress of thinking I was about to be fired for something I didn't do, didn't erase the feeling of being accused and not believed. Sarah's social media rants eventually died down. Last I checked, she'd made her accounts private, probably moved on to a new job where no one knew what she'd done. Maybe she learned something from getting caught. More likely, she just got better at not getting caught. I'm still at that job. Different location now, got transferred after the whole situation made the original store awkward. But I'm there, and I'm fine, and I never again trusted someone's word over my own judgment. If something seems off, it probably is. And if someone needs a favor badly enough to beg for it, you should probably ask yourself why they're so desperate. And sometimes, the people plotting against you aren't even waiting for the relationship to start. They're planning its end before you say I do, which is what Michael discovered in the worst possible way. I found the folder by accident. We were cleaning out her parents' attic, sorting through boxes of old childhood stuff to make room for wedding registry items we didn't have space for in our apartment. My fiancée Lauren was downstairs helping her dad with something, and I was alone up there going through her old desk, this massive oak thing from her teenage years that her mum wanted to donate. I opened one of the drawers looking for loose screws or anything that might fall out during the move, and there it was, a manila folder labeled Exit Strategy in her mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. She had very distinctive writing, all caps and precise. At first, I thought maybe it was some old business document that got misfiled. Her parents ran a small consulting firm, always had paperwork everywhere, but something made me open it, and I wish I hadn't, or maybe I'm glad I did. I still don't know. Inside was a drafted post-nuptial agreement, dated from 3 months after Lauren and I got engaged. It outlined asset division, specified that any property or inheritance from her family would remain solely hers, included clauses about spousal support limitations. This wasn't some template downloaded from the internet. It had a law firm's letterhead. Her mother had actually consulted an attorney and had this drawn up. There was more. A typed list titled Concerns About Michael. I'm reading about myself in bullet points written by my future mother-in-law. Too ambitious was on there. Like being driven and wanting to succeed in my career was somehow a character flaw. Pulls her away from family. We lived 40 minutes from her parents and visited twice a month, but apparently that was me isolating her. Doesn't prioritize family events. I'd missed one birthday dinner because I was out of state for a work conference I'd told them about months in advance. The list went on. Suspicious financial habits, which I guess meant I had my own bank account and didn't discuss my salary with her parents. Influences her decisions as if Lauren wasn't a grown woman capable of making her own choices. Uninterested in family business because I'd politely declined her father's offers to join their consulting firm since I had my own career path. But that wasn't even the worst part. There was a timeline. Handwritten notes in the margins with projected dates. 6 months, probably still in honeymoon phase. 1 year, cracks should start showing. 18 months, she'll start seeing clearly. 2 years, divorce proceedings begin. Her mother had literally created a countdown to our marriage failing. Was planning for it, expecting it. There were also printed emails between Lauren's mother and the attorney discussing strategy. How to protect Lauren's assets. Whether a prenup or postnup would be more enforceable. What grounds they could potentially use for divorce down the line. Her mother had done research, put time and effort into planning the end of a marriage that hadn't even started yet. I sat there in that dusty attic holding this folder and felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This woman who smiled at me at family dinners, who'd helped us look at wedding venues, who'd offered to pay for the rehearsal dinner, had been actively plotting our divorce for months. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Lauren coming back up. I didn't hide the folder, just held it up when she reached the top. Asked her if she knew about this. The look on her face told me she didn't. Complete shock. She grabbed it from me, started reading, and her face went from confused to horrified. She immediately tried to defend it, said her mom was just being protective, that her parents had seen friends go through bad divorces and were just trying to look out for her, that it didn't mean anything, just her mother being overly cautious. I asked if she'd known her mother had consulted a lawyer. She said no, absolutely not. She'd never have agreed to that. I asked if she knew about the timeline. The projected date for our divorce. She got quiet. Tears started forming. She said her mother had mentioned concerns, had asked her questions about whether she was really sure about getting married so young, but she'd thought it was just normal parental worry. We went downstairs. I asked to speak to her mother privately. Lauren wanted to be there, but I insisted. Her mother could tell something was wrong. I showed her the folder. She didn't even look embarrassed, just said she was protecting her daughter, that she had a responsibility as a mother to plan for all possibilities. I asked her if planning my marriage's failure before it started seemed like supporting her daughter or sabotaging her. She said I was being dramatic, that this was just paperwork, just being prepared, that if I really loved Lauren, I wouldn't be threatened by her family wanting to protect her assets. And here's where it gets absurd. She said that my reaction to finding the folder proved she'd been right to be concerned, that someone with nothing to hide wouldn't be so defensive about a simple legal document. She'd turned me discovering her betrayal into evidence that I was the problem. Lauren was crying by this point. Her father had come in, demanding to know what was going on. Her mother showed him the folder like she was the victim here. He looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. Just said they'd only been trying to do what was best for their daughter. I left, drove back to our apartment alone. Sat there for hours thinking about what I'd found. This wasn't just protective parents being cautious. This was a coordinated effort to document reasons our marriage would fail, to prepare for a divorce they expected and possibly wanted. Lauren came home late that night. We talked for hours. She swore she didn't know about the folder, that she was furious with her mother, that she'd set boundaries. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did believe her, but I kept thinking about that timeline. 2 years until divorce proceedings begin. I asked her what happened when her mother's concerns conflicted with our marriage, when her family's opinion differed from what we wanted as a couple. She said she'd choose me, choose us, but I'd seen her defend her mother's actions that same afternoon, seen her try to minimize and excuse what was clear manipulation and interference. I called off the wedding 2 days later. Lauren was devastated, begged me to reconsider, said we could work through this, that she'd established boundaries with her family, that their opinions didn't matter, but they did matter. They mattered enough that her mother felt comfortable planning our divorce before we'd even said our vows. She promised things would be different, that she'd talk to her mother, make it clear this kind of interference wasn't acceptable, that we could do couples counseling to work through the trust issues, that she loved me and wanted to build a life together regardless of what her parents thought. I told her I believed she meant that in the moment, but I'd seen the folder. I'd seen a timeline that predicted when she'd come to her senses and leave me, and I couldn't spend my marriage waiting for that moment. Couldn't build a life with someone whose family was actively rooting for us to fail and preparing legal strategies for when we did. The breakup was messy, Her family blamed me, told everyone I'd called off the wedding over a misunderstanding, that I'd overreacted to protective parents doing what any family would do. Some of our mutual friends believed them. Others quietly reached out to say they understood why I'd left. Lauren tried for months to get me back, sent long messages about how she'd cut contact with her mother, how she'd chosen me over her family, how we could start fresh. But the damage was done. I couldn't unknow what her family thought of me. Couldn't forget that timeline counting down to our divorce. She got engaged again about 10 months after we broke up, to someone who worked in her family's business. Someone her mother approved of. They got married within a year of meeting. I heard through mutual friends that her mother was thrilled, that this guy was perfect, everything they'd wanted for Lauren. Part of me wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd thrown away something real because of her mother's paranoia. But then I remembered the folder, the drafted post-nuptial agreement, the list of my flaws as evidence I wasn't good enough, the timeline projecting our failure. I'd dodged something, not a bad marriage to Lauren necessarily, but a lifetime of interference from in-laws who'd never accept me, who'd always be waiting for me to prove them right, who'd prepared legal documents before we'd even combined our Netflix accounts. I'm engaged now to someone else. Someone whose parents asked to meet me because they were excited their daughter was happy, not because they needed to vet me as a threat. Someone whose family celebrated our engagement instead of consulting divorce attorneys. I never told my fiancé the full story of why my previous engagement ended. Just said we had fundamental differences about family boundaries, which is true, just maybe not the full truth. But sometimes I think about that folder, about how close I came to marrying into a family that was counting down to our divorce, about how her mother's exit strategy was more detailed than our wedding plans, and I'm grateful I found it when I did. Family manipulation is exhausting, but fake emergencies designed to exploit you financially? That's a special kind of evil that Liam experienced firsthand. My cousin Ashley called me at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was dead asleep, phone buzzing on my nightstand until I finally grabbed it. She was hysterical, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. I sat up, immediately awake, heart pounding because calls at that hour are never good news. She finally got the words out. Uncle Dave had a heart attack. He was in the hospital, needed emergency surgery, the kind that couldn't wait. But there was a problem with his insurance, something about coverage limits or out-of-network facilities. She was talking so fast I couldn't follow all the details. Bottom line, they needed $5,000 immediately, or the hospital wouldn't do the procedure. She was begging me, saying I was the only family member with savings, that Uncle Dave would die if we didn't come up with the money right now. Uncle Dave practically raised me. When my parents divorced and things got ugly, I stayed with him and my aunt for 2 years during high school. He taught me to drive, helped me apply to colleges, gave me advice about everything from jobs to relationships. If he needed help, there was no question. I told Ashley I'd send the money right away. I got out of bed, logged into my bank account, and wired $5,000 to the account number she gave me. It was most of my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for years. But this was an emergency, the actual kind, life or death. I texted her confirmation of the transfer and told her to keep me updated on Uncle Dave's condition. She sent back a string of thank you messages and heart emojis, said I'd saved his life, that she'd never forget this. I couldn't sleep after that. Spent the rest of the night anxiously checking my phone, waiting for updates about the surgery. Nothing came. By morning I was exhausted and worried. I called Ashley around 8. Voicemail. Texted asking how Uncle Dave was doing. No response. Called my aunt's house. No answer there either. I went to work distracted, kept checking my phone obsessively. Finally, around noon, I called the hospital Ashley had mentioned, asked about David Morrison in their cardiac unit. They had no patient by that name. I asked if maybe he'd been discharged already. They checked their records for the past week. No David Morrison had been admitted. I felt cold. Called 3 other hospitals in their area. Same answer. No record of my uncle being admitted anywhere. I pulled up Facebook, something I rarely check, and searched for Uncle Dave's profile. His most recent post was from that morning. A photo of him at a golf course with his buddies. Caption about beautiful weather and a great game. I stared at that photo for probably 5 minutes. Uncle Dave looked healthy, happy, very much not recovering from emergency heart surgery. I screenshot the post and called Ashley. She didn't answer. I called 4 more times. Nothing. Sent a text saying I knew there was no medical emergency and I wanted an explanation immediately. She finally called back that evening. Didn't even apologize at first, just started making excuses. Said she'd panicked, didn't know what else to do. Knew I'd help if she said it was Uncle Dave. I asked what the actual emergency was. She went quiet for a long moment, then admitted she and her boyfriend had gone to Atlantic City for the weekend. They'd gambled, lost badly, blew through their rent money, plus another $3,000 they didn't have on credit cards. Her boyfriend didn't know about the gambling. She'd told him she was visiting a friend. The rent was due in 3 days, and if she didn't have it, he'd find out what she'd done. She'd used my love for Uncle Dave, my middle-of-the-night panic and compassion, as an ATM to cover her gambling debts and lies. The audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. I asked if she understood what she'd done, that she'd made me think someone I loved was dying, that I'd sent her my emergency savings based on a complete fabrication. She started crying again, said she knew it was wrong, that she'd been desperate, that she'd fully intended to pay me back as soon as she got her next paycheck. I told her I wanted the money back now. She said she couldn't, that she'd already paid her landlord and the credit card minimums, that it was gone. I asked when she was planning to pay me back. She got defensive, said I was being cruel, that family helps family in times of need, that I was valuing money over our relationship. I pointed out that there was no actual need. She'd gambled away her rent and lied about a medical emergency to cover her own bad choices. She said I was being vindictive, that if I really cared about family, I wouldn't be making such a big deal about this, that she'd said she'd pay me back eventually and that should be enough. I told her we were done talking until I saw a repayment plan in writing. She hung up on me. But that wasn't even the worst part. Within days, my extended family started calling. My aunt, some cousins, even Uncle Dave himself. All of them had been told by Ashley that she'd called me during a financial crisis, that she'd been honest about needing help with rent, and that I'd refused because I thought she was irresponsible with money, that she'd begged me to reconsider, and I'd been cruel and judgmental. Her version had me as the villain, the family member with money who refused to help someone struggling. No mention of the fake heart attack, no mention of lying about Uncle Dave dying, just a story about me being cold and valuing money over family bonds. I tried explaining what actually happened, sent screenshots of the 2 a.m. call log, the texts about Uncle Dave's supposed surgery, his Facebook post from the golf course the next morning. Some family members were horrified, apologized for believing Ashley's story, couldn't believe she'd lie about something like that. Others were skeptical, said maybe I'd misunderstood the situation, that Ashley wouldn't lie about Uncle Dave being sick. Uncle Dave called me directly, asked what the hell was going on. I explained everything, sent him the same screenshots. He was furious, not at me, at Ashley for using his name and health as leverage for her gambling debts. He called her himself, told her what she'd done was unforgivable. She apparently cried and said she'd been desperate, that she'd made a terrible mistake. And here's where it gets absurd. Ashley started posting vague social media updates about toxic family members who can't forgive mistakes, about how some people hold grudges over money instead of showing grace, about learning who really has your back during hard times. The comments were full of support from people who had no idea what actually happened. Some of those supportive comments came from family members who knew the truth, who knew she'd lied about a medical emergency, but apparently thought I should just let it go anyway, that making her face consequences for fraud and manipulation was somehow worse than what she'd actually done. I asked for a repayment plan multiple times. She ignored me. I threatened small claims court. She said I'd have to prove the money was a loan and not a gift. Technically, she had a point. I'd sent it so fast, so panicked, that I hadn't gotten anything in writing, just wired $5,000 based on her word that my uncle was dying. I talked to a lawyer. They said I could sue, but it would cost almost as much as I'd lost just to file and pursue it. That family court cases were messy and hard to win without documentation. I could file a police report for fraud, but that would mean pressing charges against my own cousin. The lawyer asked if I really wanted to go that route. I didn't. Not because Ashley deserved my mercy, but because I was tired. Tired of the drama, the family taking sides, the constant justification of why lying about someone's death to steal money was actually bad. I decided to let it go legally, but cut Ashley off completely. Blocked her number, unfriended her on social media, told other family members I didn't want updates about her, or to be invited to events where she'd be present. Some people understood, others said I was being stubborn, that family forgives family, that holding on to anger only hurts yourself. But I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Done with people who thought family was an excuse for behavior you'd never tolerate from anyone else. Done with the idea that blood relation meant infinite second chances, regardless of how badly someone betrayed your trust. I don't loan money anymore, to anyone. Family, friends, doesn't matter. Someone asks for financial help, I say no, every time. Some people think that makes me cold or selfish. I think it makes me smart. I learned an expensive lesson about trusting the wrong people, and I'm not paying for a second education. Ashley still owes me $5,000. I'll never see it. I've accepted that. But what I gained was clarity about who in my family actually deserves my trust and who just sees me as a resource to exploit when convenient. That knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, turned out to be worth the cost. And when professionals you're supposed to trust join forces against you, the betrayal reaches another level entirely. Something Zoe learned when therapy became a weapon. My partner started therapy for what they called our communication issues. I was supportive. Honestly, I thought it was a great idea. We'd been having the same circular arguments for months, needed some professional perspective to help us understand each other better. They found someone who took their insurance, started going weekly. I was hopeful. The first few weeks seemed fine. They'd come home from sessions talking about active listening techniques, about using I statements instead of you statements. Normal therapy stuff. I tried to implement what they were learning, asked how sessions were going, they said it was helpful, that they were gaining clarity. Then things started shifting. They'd come home from therapy, and suddenly I was the problem in ways I'd never heard before. I was emotionally manipulative. I was controlling. I was unable to accept accountability for my actions. These weren't conversations. These were accusations delivered with therapeutic terminology that made them sound official and true. I'd ask for examples of when I'd been manipulative. They'd say their therapist helped them see patterns I was too defensive to recognize, that my asking for examples was itself a form of manipulation, trying to make them doubt their own perceptions. Every response I had was reframed as evidence of the problem. My boundaries became control tactics. When I said I needed space after an argument, that was stonewalling. When I asked them not to share private details of our relationship with their friends, that was isolation. When I got upset about something they'd done, that was emotional abuse. The therapy language was being weaponized against me in ways that made me question my own reality. I started walking on eggshells, second-guessing everything I said or did. Was I being manipulative by asking them to text if they'd be home late? Was I being controlling by wanting us to make financial decisions together? The person who was supposed to be getting help to improve our relationship was using therapy as ammunition to tear me down. But that wasn't even the worst part. About 4 months into their therapy, they mentioned their therapist's name in passing. Dr. Brennan. Dr. Emily Brennan. My stomach dropped. I asked them to repeat the name. They did. I asked what she looked like. The description matched. Dr. Emily Brennan was my college roommate, or had been for one absolutely miserable year sophomore year. We'd had a falling out over a guy, her ex-boyfriend, who she'd broken up with, who I'd started dating a few months later. She'd acted like I'd committed the ultimate betrayal, even though they were already done, made my life hell for the rest of that year, spread rumors, turned mutual friends against me, left passive-aggressive notes around our dorm room. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, and now she was my partner's therapist. The person my partner was trusting to help them navigate our relationship was someone who'd hated me for 10 years over college drama. I told my partner immediately, explained the history, that this was my old roommate who we'd had a terrible falling out with. They looked uncomfortable but said it was probably just a coincidence, that Dr. Brennan was a professional, that she wouldn't let personal history affect her treatment, that maybe I was being paranoid. I asked if Dr. Brennan had ever mentioned knowing me. My partner said no. I pointed out that was a huge ethical violation. Therapists are supposed to disclose conflicts of interest. If she knew who I was and didn't say anything, that was a problem. My partner said maybe she didn't recognize my name, that it had been a long time, but I knew she recognized it. We'd lived together for a year. She'd written my name on angry notes she left on my desk. She'd complained about me to anyone who'd listen. There was no way she heard my partner talking about someone with my relatively uncommon first and last name and didn't make the connection. I asked my partner to switch therapists. They refused, said they'd built rapport with Dr. Brennan, that starting over with someone new would set back their progress, that I was trying to control who they saw, which was exactly the kind of manipulative behavior Dr. Brennan was helping them identify. The sessions continued. The accusations got worse. My partner came home one day and said Dr. Brennan had helped them realize our entire relationship was built on my need for control, that I'd isolated them from friends and family, that I exhibited signs of narcissistic personality disorder. None of this was true. We had a normal social life. I encouraged their friendships. I'd never been diagnosed with any personality disorder. And here's where it gets absurd. My partner started recording our arguments, said Dr. Brennan suggested it so they could review interactions and identify my manipulation tactics. I felt like I was being studied, analyzed, like everything I said was evidence in a case being built against me. I tried one more time to get them to see how unethical this was, sat them down, explained calmly that a therapist who had personal history with one person in a relationship should not be treating the other person, that Dr. Brennan's judgment was compromised, that the things they were being told about me didn't match reality. They said I was trying to undermine their mental health journey, that I couldn't handle them getting stronger and seeing through my tactics, that Dr. Brennan had warned them I might react this way, might try to get them to stop therapy. I ended the relationship that week. I couldn't stay with someone who believed I was an abusive narcissist based on the word of someone who'd hated me for a decade, someone who was weaponizing therapy language to rewrite our entire history together. My partner was shocked, said this proved Dr. Brennan right, that I was abandoning them the moment they started standing up for themselves. I packed my things and left. Then I filed a complaint with the state licensing board, detailed the conflict of interest, the fact that Dr. Brennan had never disclosed knowing me, despite months of sessions about our relationship, included documentation of our college connection, screenshots of old social media posts from back when we were roommates that proved we knew each other. The investigation took 6 months. I had to provide statements, timelines, evidence of the relationship between my ex-partner and Dr. Brennan. It was exhausting and invasive, but the board found that Dr. Brennan had violated ethical guidelines by not disclosing a personal relationship with a client's partner, that her treatment had been compromised by bias. She lost her license, not permanently, but suspended for 2 years with required ethics training before she could reapply. My ex found out through their insurance company when they tried to schedule a session and were told Dr. Brennan was no longer practicing. They called me furious, said I'd ruined Dr. Brennan's career out of spite, that I couldn't handle someone finally calling out my behavior so I'd destroyed a good therapist's life, that this was the most manipulative thing I'd ever done. I tried to explain that what Dr. Brennan did was a serious ethical violation, that therapists have rules for exactly this reason, that she'd used her position to harm me through their treatment. They didn't want to hear it, said I was still playing the victim, still refusing to take accountability. We haven't spoken since. I heard through mutual friends that they found a new therapist who actually helped them, that they eventually realized some of what Dr. Brennan had told them didn't make sense, that maybe the sessions had been less objective than they'd thought. But they still blame me for Dr. Brennan losing her license, still tell people I filed a vindictive complaint because I couldn't handle the truth about myself. Some of our former mutual friends believe them. The ones who know me better understand that what happened was a violation of trust and professional ethics, that a therapist using their position to validate decade-old grudges isn't therapy, it's revenge with a license. I'm in therapy now myself, real therapy, with someone who has no connection to my life or my past, working through the gaslighting, the self-doubt, the months of being told I was abusive when I wasn't. It's slow going. My therapist says what Dr. Brennan did was unconscionable, that even if she'd had legitimate concerns about my behavior based on what my ex reported, she should have disclosed our history and referred them to someone else, that treating someone's partner when you have personal animosity toward them isn't just unethical, it's harmful to everyone involved. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just walked away without filing the complaint. Let Dr. Brennan keep her license and her career, but then I think about the next person she might do this to, the next client whose partner she might have a grudge against, the damage she could cause with that kind of unchecked bias. She lost her license because she violated ethical guidelines designed to protect people. That's not vindictive. That's accountability, even if my ex and half our old friend group will never see it that way. Speaking of careers being ruined, sometimes standing up for what's right at work makes you the target instead of the hero, as Cameron discovered when integrity became a liability. My manager called me into his office on a Friday afternoon, said he needed a favor. We were coming up on end of quarter and the numbers weren't where corporate wanted them. He pulled up a spreadsheet, showed me about 15 invoices from early April, asked me to change the dates to late March so the revenue would count for Q1 instead of Q2. I stared at him for a second, thought maybe I'd misunderstood, asked him to clarify what he was asking. He said it again, more directly this time. Backdate the invoices, shift the revenue, make the quarter look better. Said it casually, like he was asking me to update a contact list or organize files. I told him I couldn't do that. That backdating financial documents was fraud. He laughed, actually laughed, and said I was being dramatic, that this was standard practice, that every company did it, that revenue recognition was complicated, and this was just a timing issue. I pointed out that intentionally falsifying dates to manipulate financial reporting wasn't a timing issue, it was a crime. He stopped smiling, said I was making a big deal out of nothing, that if I wanted to advance in this company, I needed to be flexible and understand how business actually worked. That idealism was fine in theory, but in the real world, you did what needed to be done. I said I understood perfectly how business worked, and this wasn't it, that I wouldn't be part of anything that could get me fired or prosecuted. He got cold then, said he was disappointed in my attitude, that he thought I was a team player. I said team players don't ask each other to commit fraud. The meeting ended badly. Things changed immediately. My next performance review, which should have been routine since I'd consistently exceeded targets, suddenly noted concerns about my flexibility and willingness to collaborate. Projects I'd been leading got reassigned without explanation. I was excluded from strategy meetings I'd always attended. My manager would schedule team discussions, and somehow my calendar invite would get lost. Colleagues started avoiding me in the hallways. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. Nobody wanted to grab lunch anymore. I wasn't invited to happy hours. It was like I'd been marked somehow, and everyone could see it but me. I asked my manager directly what was going on. He said nothing was going on, that maybe I was being paranoid, that if I felt excluded it was probably because my attitude had been negative lately, and people were picking up on that. Classic gaslighting, making me question whether the isolation I was experiencing was real or just my perception. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started noticing other irregularities, not just the backdated invoices, but expense reports that didn't match receipts, vendor contracts with suspicious terms, payments to companies that didn't seem to provide any actual services. The fraud I'd refused to participate in wasn't isolated, it was systemic. I documented everything. Screenshots, forwarded emails to my personal account, printed copies of suspicious documents, kept it all in a folder at home. Wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed evidence if this went sideways. 3 months after I'd refused to backdate those invoices, I filed an anonymous tip with the corporate ethics hotline, detailed the revenue manipulation, the suspicious vendor payments, the expense report irregularities, gave them specific dates and document references. Then I waited. The audit came 2 weeks later. Corporate sent a team to review our financials. My manager looked stressed, kept having closed-door meetings with the VPs. People were being called in for interviews about their knowledge of certain transactions. The office energy was tense, everyone nervous about what was being uncovered. And here's where it gets absurd. I was questioned too, asked what I knew about the revenue recognition practices in our department. I told them the truth, that my manager had asked me to backdate invoices, that I'd refused, that I'd noticed other irregularities. They took notes, thanked me for my cooperation. The investigation took 6 weeks. My manager was fired. 2 VPs were terminated. Several other employees were put on administrative leave. The company issued a statement about addressing compliance failures and strengthening internal controls. From the outside, it looked like they'd cleaned house and solved the problem. Internally, I was still labeled a troublemaker. The people who hadn't been fired knew someone had tipped off corporate, and somehow, despite the anonymous nature of the hotline, word got around that it was probably me. I'd been the one asking uncomfortable questions, the one who'd refused to play ball, the one who'd suddenly been iced out right before the audit started. Nobody said it directly to my face, but I'd hear whispers, see people look at me and then quickly look away, get left out of even more meetings than before. My new manager, brought in after the firings, treated me with obvious suspicion, like I might report her next if she made a wrong move. My performance reviews continued to be mediocre, despite my actual performance remaining strong. I was told I wasn't a team player, that I had difficulty building collaborative relationships, that my communication style created friction, all code for the same thing. I'd reported wrongdoing and now I was paying for it. 6 months after the audit, there was a restructuring. My position was eliminated. They offered me a lower level role in a different department with a pay cut. I declined. They gave me a severance package and wished me well. The exit interview was perfunctory. Nobody acknowledged that I'd been pushed out for doing the right thing. I landed at a better company within a month. Better pay, better culture, leadership that actually seemed to care about ethics and compliance. Should have been a clean break from the whole mess. But the scarlet letter followed me. This is where it gets really insidious. Professional networks talk. People from my old company knew people at my new company. Whispers started. That I was difficult. That I'd caused problems at my last job. That I didn't work well with others. None of it was directly attributable. Just vague warnings in informal conversations. A colleague at the new company pulled me aside after a few months. Said she'd heard some things about me from a friend at my old firm. Asked if there was anything I wanted to share about why I'd left. I gave her the sanitized version. That there had been compliance issues at my previous company, that I'd reported them through proper channels, that the situation had been resolved but the environment had become difficult afterward. She nodded like she understood, said she appreciated my honesty. But I could tell the whispers had done their damage. I was being watched more closely. My work was being scrutinized more carefully. I had to prove myself all over again despite my track record. It took almost 2 years before the informal blacklisting really faded. 2 years of working twice as hard to overcome a reputation as a troublemaker that I'd earned by refusing to commit fraud. 2 years of dealing with people who'd heard I was difficult before they'd ever met me. The irony is that I'd do it again. If my manager asked me tomorrow to backdate documents or falsify records, I'd refuse. If I saw systematic fraud, I'd report it. The professional cost was real and significant, but the alternative was participating in illegal activity or staying silent while others did. But nobody tells you that doing the right thing can absolutely destroy your career in the short term. That whistleblower protections mostly exist on paper and don't protect you from subtle retaliation or reputation damage. That being ethical can make you unemployable in certain circles. I'm doing well now. Made it through the rough period, built new professional relationships with people who value integrity over compliance with corrupt systems. But I'm also more careful, more aware of the political realities of corporate environments, more strategic about which battles to fight and how to fight them. The people who got fired deserved it. They were committing fraud, risking the entire company's stability and employee livelihoods to make their quarterly numbers look good. But I was naive to think that exposing them would be consequence-free for me, that truth and ethics would automatically be rewarded. They weren't. I paid a real professional price for refusing to break the law, and that's a dark truth about corporate culture that nobody wants to acknowledge. Sometimes the right choice and the smart choice aren't the same thing. I made the right choice, but I'm still dealing with the consequences years later. And when your entire friend group decides to rewrite history, suddenly you're the villain in a story you didn't even recognize. Exactly what happened to Alicia at that dinner party. We had a blow-up at a dinner party, one of those nights that starts normal and ends with everyone uncomfortable and looking at their phones. Sarah had invited the group over to her place, maybe 8 of us total, people I'd known since college. We were having drinks, making dinner together, the usual weekend thing we did every few weeks. I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when Sarah's boyfriend, Jake, came in to grab another beer. We were talking about some show we'd both been watching, laughing about a particularly ridiculous plot twist. Normal conversation, the kind you have with people in your friend group without thinking twice about it. Sarah walked in and the energy shifted immediately. She got this look on her face, tight and cold. Asked what was so funny. Jake said we were just talking about the show. She said it looked like more than that. I genuinely didn't understand what she meant at first. Then she said maybe I should be more aware of how I act around other people's boyfriends. I was stunned, asked her what she was talking about. She said I'd been flirting with Jake all night, that everyone had noticed, that it was disrespectful and embarrassing. I looked at Jake expecting him to say something, to clarify that we'd literally just been talking about a TV show. He just stood there looking uncomfortable. I told Sarah I hadn't been flirting with anyone, that we'd been having a normal conversation and she was reading something into it that wasn't there. She said I was being defensive, that if I wasn't doing anything wrong, I wouldn't need to defend myself so hard. The logic made no sense, but she was getting louder. Other people had come into the kitchen by then, everyone watching. I tried to keep my voice calm, said I was sorry if something I'd done had upset her, but I genuinely didn't think I'd been inappropriate. She said that was a non-apology, that I was deflecting instead of taking responsibility. The whole thing spiraled. I got frustrated, told her she was being paranoid and unfair. She said I was gaslighting her. I said she was accusing me of something I didn't do, and I wasn't going to apologize for her insecurity. Voices were definitely raised by that point. The whole party had basically stopped to watch us argue. I apologized for the tension I'd created and left. Grabbed my coat and walked out while Sarah was still talking. Texted the group chat later that night saying I was sorry for how the evening had ended, that I'd let my frustration get the better of me. A few people responded saying it was fine, that these things happen, not to worry about it. Sarah didn't respond at all. Neither did Jake. I figured we'd all move past it eventually. Friend groups have conflicts. You work through them. But that wasn't even the worst part. About 3 weeks later, I ran into Emma, someone who'd been at the party but wasn't part of our core group. She mentioned she'd heard about what happened at Sarah's dinner. I said, yeah, it had been awkward, but hopefully things would smooth over. She gave me this weird look and said she'd heard I'd gotten really drunk and completely lost it on Sarah. That I'd screamed at her, called her names, made everyone super uncomfortable. I told her that wasn't what happened, that I hadn't even been drinking that night. I'd driven there, had stuck to water because I had an early morning the next day. She looked confused, said that's not the story she'd heard from multiple people who were there. I started asking around, carefully at first, then more directly. The story going around was that I'd shown up to the party already tipsy, had been openly hitting on Jake all night, and when Sarah confronted me, I'd had a meltdown. Screaming, name-calling, through a drink apparently. Complete fabrication. None of it happened. I confronted the group, posted in our group chat, asking who was telling people I'd been drunk and verbally abusive at the party. Long silence. Then Sarah responded saying she'd just been honest with people about what happened, that I'd been out of control and she'd felt unsafe. I pointed out I hadn't been drinking, that multiple people at the party could confirm that. She said I was misremembering, that I'd definitely had wine. Others chimed in agreeing with her. People who'd been there, who'd watched me drink water all night, were suddenly backing up Sarah's version, where I'd been drunk and aggressive. I asked about the supposed screaming and name-calling. What exactly had I called her? No one could provide specifics, just that I'd been really mean and out of line. I pulled up the group chat from that night, showed them my apology message about letting my frustration get the better of me, asked how that matched with their story of me being belligerently drunk. They said I was playing victim, that I was trying to rewrite what happened because I couldn't handle taking responsibility, that everyone at the party had been uncomfortable with my behavior, and they'd all discussed it afterward and agreed I'd crossed lines. And here's where it gets absurd. I realized what had actually happened. They'd collectively decided I was the problem, because it was easier than dealing with Sarah's jealousy issues. Sarah had a pattern of this, getting weird and possessive about Jake, accusing other women of flirting with him. It had happened before with other people, but instead of addressing that Sarah might have some insecurity she needed to work on, they'd decided the solution was to make me the villain. If I was drunk and inappropriate, then Sarah's reaction was justified. If they all agreed I'd been out of control, then they didn't have to confront the uncomfortable truth that Sarah had started a fight over nothing, and they'd all just watched it happen. I sent one final message to the group chat, laid out exactly what had happened from my perspective, that I hadn't been drinking, that I hadn't flirted with Jake, that Sarah had accused me of something I didn't do, and I'd gotten frustrated defending myself, that I was sorry for raising my voice, but I wasn't going to accept responsibility for things I didn't do just to make everyone else comfortable. Then I left the group chat. They called me dramatic, said I was burning bridges over a misunderstanding, that real friends work through conflicts instead of running away. I blocked most of them. Kept a few people on social media who hadn't actively participated in rewriting history, but the friendships were basically over. For months I second-guessed myself, wondered if maybe I had been drunker than I remembered, if maybe I had said things worse than I thought. But I knew I hadn't been drinking. I had the text to prove what time I'd left, the apology I'd sent. I knew what actually happened versus what they'd decided happened. A year later, Jake left Sarah. I heard through the few remaining mutual connections that he'd started dating someone else, that when he broke up with Sarah, he'd told her she was too jealous and controlling, that he couldn't deal with her constant accusations about other women, that he'd felt like he couldn't have normal conversations with female friends without her creating drama. None of the friend group apologized. A few people quietly refollowed me on Instagram, maybe feeling guilty, maybe just hoping I'd forgotten. I didn't accept the requests. I didn't need friends who'd collectively gaslight me to avoid uncomfortable conversations about someone else's issues. Sarah posted vague things on social media about fake friends and betrayal when Jake left her. The same people who'd backed her story about me being drunk and aggressive were commenting supportive messages. I wondered if any of them saw the irony. I built a new friend group, slowly, carefully. People who didn't require me to be the villain in someone else's story, who didn't rewrite reality to avoid difficult conversations. It was lonely for a while, but better to be alone than surrounded by people who'd throw you under the bus for convenience. I still think about that dinner party sometimes, how quickly a normal evening became a test of whether people actually knew me or just needed someone to blame. They chose the easier narrative. I chose my own sanity. The wildest part is I genuinely believe most of them convinced themselves their version was true. That's how group dynamics work sometimes. Everyone agrees on a story, and suddenly that becomes reality, regardless of what actually happened. They needed me to be drunk and out of control, so I was. My actual experience didn't matter, but nothing quite compares to living with someone who stops contributing and then makes you the bad guy for noticing, which became Jordan's nightmare scenario. My roommate Kayla lost her job in March. She told me the same day it happened, was crying, clearly stressed about how she'd make rent. I felt bad for her. We'd been living together for almost a year, got along well enough, and I knew how brutal the job market could be. I told her not to worry about April's rent, that she should focus on finding something new and we'd figure it out. April came and went. She said she was applying everywhere, had a few interviews lined up. I covered her half of the rent plus utilities, told myself it was temporary, that she'd pay me back once she got on her feet. May rolled around and she still didn't have a job, said the interviews hadn't panned out, that the market was tougher than she'd expected. I covered her again, started eating cheaper meals, skipped a few things I'd normally buy. My savings were taking a hit, but I figured that's what you do for people you live with. Then I started noticing things. New clothes showing up in her room, packages being delivered. She'd mentioned going out for drinks with friends, taking a weekend trip to visit her sister upstate. I asked her how she was affording all that if she couldn't pay rent. She said her parents were helping her out with personal expenses, that she felt bad asking them for rent money too. That didn't sit right with me. Her parents could give her money for shopping and trips, but not for rent. But I didn't push it. Figured her family dynamics weren't my business as long as she was genuinely trying to find work. By June, I'd covered 3 months of her rent, almost $3,000 out of my own pocket. I sat her down and said I couldn't keep doing this indefinitely, that I needed her to either start contributing something or we needed to figure out a different living arrangement. She got defensive immediately, said I was being insensitive, that she was doing her best, that looking for a job was a full-time job in itself. I asked if she'd applied anywhere that week. She couldn't give me specifics, just vague mentions of online applications and networking. I asked if her parents could help with rent since they were helping with other expenses. She said that wasn't fair, that I was trying to control her relationship with her family. The conversation went nowhere. She promised she'd have something figured out by July. I told her that was the deadline. Either she paid her share starting in July, or she needed to find somewhere else to live. But that wasn't even the worst part. July came. No job. No rent money. I reminded her of our conversation. She looked me dead in the eye and said she wasn't going anywhere, that she'd lived here long enough to have tenant rights, that I couldn't just kick her out. I pointed out she wasn't on the lease. She said it didn't matter, that she could claim squatters' rights, and if I tried to force her out or touch her belongings, she'd call the police. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd covered her rent for months out of kindness, and now she was threatening me with legal action to stay in my apartment without paying. I told her that wasn't how any of this worked. She shrugged and went to her room. I called the landlord that same day, explained the situation. He said since she wasn't on the lease, I had grounds to remove her, but I needed to do it properly to avoid legal issues. Gave me the number for a lawyer who handled tenant disputes. The lawyer confirmed that Kayla had no legal right to stay since she wasn't on the lease and hadn't paid rent in months. But I still needed to follow formal eviction procedures, give her written notice, file with the court if she didn't leave voluntarily. It would take at least 30 days, maybe longer if she contested it. I gave her the notice that week. 30 days to vacate the premises. She read it and laughed, said I was being dramatic, that I'd regret this, that mutual friends would know what kind of person I really was, kicking someone out during the hardest time of their life. And here's where it gets absurd. She started telling people her version of events, that she'd lost her job and was struggling, that I'd promised I didn't mind covering rent temporarily, and now I was suddenly kicking her out with no warning because I was petty and cruel. She left out the 3 months of free housing, the weekend trips, the new clothes, the refusal to pay or leave. Mutual friends started reaching out. Some were genuinely checking in, others were clearly taking her side. I had to explain repeatedly that I'd supported her for months, that she was refusing to contribute or move out, that I'd followed legal procedures because she'd threatened me. Some people got it. Others said I should have been more patient, that a few more months wouldn't have killed me. The 30 days crawled by. Kayla made no effort to pack or look for a new place, just acted like the notice didn't exist. On day 29, I reminded her she had 1 day left. She said she wasn't going anywhere, that I'd have to physically remove her. I filed the formal eviction the next morning. Court date was set for 2 weeks out. Kayla got served with the papers at the apartment. She was furious, said this was all going on my permanent record somehow, that I'd never be able to rent again after evicting someone. I pointed out she was the one being evicted for non-payment and refusal to leave. She slammed her door. The court hearing was quick. I had the lease showing only my name, bank statements showing I'd paid full rent for months, copies of the notice I'd given her. She had nothing but a story about me being heartless. The judge ruled in my favor. She had 7 days to vacate. Those 7 days were tense. She barely spoke to me, just glared whenever we crossed paths. I stayed at a friend's place a few nights because the atmosphere was so hostile. On the day she was supposed to be out, I came home from work to find her gone. Finally. I felt relieved until I opened my bedroom door. She'd trashed it, dumped out my drawers, thrown clothes everywhere, broken a framed photo I'd had on my desk, and my TV was gone. The nice one I'd bought myself after getting a promotion. Just gone. She'd taken it along with a few other things. My laptop charger, some books, a coffee maker that had been in the kitchen. I called the police, filed a report for theft and vandalism. They said it would be hard to prove since she'd had access to the apartment and could claim the items were gifts or jointly purchased. I knew the TV was mine, had the receipt, but they said recovery was unlikely. Suggested I take her to small claims court. So I did. Filed for the stolen items, the damage to my room, the months of unpaid rent. The amount came to over $4,000. She didn't show up to the hearing. Judge ruled in my favor by default. I won the case. I never saw a penny. You can't get money from someone who refuses to pay and has nothing you can garnish. The judgment sits there on record, but it's worthless. Kayla moved back in with her parents, blocked me on everything, and from what I heard through mutual friends, she tells people I stole from her. I live alone now. The apartment's quieter, cleaner, and I don't have to worry about someone taking advantage of me. I'm also much more careful about who I help financially. You want to borrow money? Get it in writing. You need rent covered? 1 month maybe with a clear repayment plan. You're not on the lease? You're not moving in. Some people think I'm jaded or cynical now. Maybe I am, but I learned an expensive lesson about the difference between helping someone and enabling them to take advantage of you. Kayla wasn't struggling because of her job loss. She was struggling because she'd rather spend money on trips and clothes than take responsibility for her living situation. The mutual friends who took her side aren't friends anymore. If they thought I was wrong for following legal eviction procedures after months of supporting someone who threatened me, they can take her in next time she needs a place to stay. I'm done being the person people use until it's inconvenient, then villainize when I finally set a boundary. I got my security deposit back after Kayla left, used part of it to replace the TV, the rest went back into savings to rebuild what I'd spent keeping her housed. It took months to feel financially stable again. Every time I wanted to buy something, I had to remind myself that I wasn't covering someone else's expenses anymore, that my money was actually mine to spend. Living alone costs more, but it's worth every penny for the peace of mind. And sometimes the most public humiliations come wrapped in celebration, disguised as a toast, which is how Nina discovered a family secret everyone had been keeping from her. At my cousin's wedding, the maid of honor gave a toast that made the entire reception go silent. Not in a good way. She was crying, talking about how beautiful it was to see the bride and groom finally get their happy ending after everything they'd been through. She kept referencing these hard years apart, something about forgiving the past, about true love finding its way back. I was sitting there smiling politely, assuming she was just being dramatic about normal relationship stuff. Long distance, maybe, or family drama I didn't know about. But then I noticed the looks around the room. People were exchanging glances, uncomfortable shifting in seats. My aunt was staring at her plate. The bride's mum looked like she wanted to disappear. I leaned over to my mum and whispered, asking what the maid of honor was talking about. My mum went completely pale, grabbed my arm and said we'd talk later. I asked again, quieter. She shook her head, gave me this pleading look that said, "Drop it." The toast ended. Everyone clapped. The reception continued, but there was this weird tension I couldn't quite place. I watched my family members carefully after that, the way certain people avoided making eye contact with each other. How conversations would stop when I approached. Something was very wrong, and I was apparently the only person who didn't know what. I cornered my sister during the reception, asked her point blank what was going on. She looked torn, like she wanted to tell me but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, she pulled me outside and explained. The groom had cheated on my cousin 5 years ago. Not just a one-time thing, a whole affair that lasted months. They'd broken up over it. Messy, devastating breakup. He'd moved on, dated someone else seriously for almost 2 years. Then he and my cousin had reconnected, worked through everything, decided to give it another shot. I stood there processing this information, asked my sister when this happened. She said 5 years ago, like I'd heard her the first time. I said I meant when did they get back together? She said about a year and a half ago. I'd seen them at family events for over a year and had no idea any of this history existed. But that wasn't even the worst part. I asked my sister who knew. She looked uncomfortable, said everyone knew. The whole family had been there for my cousin during the breakup, had opinions about whether she should take him back, had watched the whole reconciliation happen. Everyone except me. I'd been intentionally kept in the dark. While the rest of the family was having conversations about my cousin's relationship, debating whether the groom deserved a second chance, supporting her through working on trust issues, I was just obliviously going to family dinners thinking everything was normal. I went back inside and started really observing. The way people were careful about what they said around me, how certain topics seemed off limits when I joined conversations. I'd thought I was imagining things before, being paranoid. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. After the wedding, I confronted my parents, asked them why I'd been excluded from something that apparently the entire family knew about and had opinions on. My mum said they were protecting me, that I was going through a hard time in my own life back then, dealing with stuff at work, and they didn't want to burden me with family drama. I pointed out that was 5 years ago. What about the year and a half since they'd gotten back together? My dad said by that point it seemed easier to just not bring it up, that everyone had moved on and rehashing the past would just create problems. I asked if they realized how insulting it was to be treated like a child who couldn't handle reality. They got defensive, said I was overreacting, that they'd made a judgment call about what to share and when, that not every family member needs to know every detail of everyone else's business. I said this wasn't some minor detail. This was a major relationship crisis and reconciliation that had affected the whole family, and I'd been walking around clueless while everyone else had full context. My mum teared up, said she didn't understand why I was so upset, that nothing had changed, that my cousin was happy now, that the past was the past. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the secret itself. It was about being the only person excluded. about discovering that my family had collectively decided I couldn't be trusted with information everyone else had. And here's where it gets absurd. My sister told me later that there had actually been conversations about whether to tell me, family discussions where they debated if I should be brought into the loop, and they'd decided no. Multiple times over the course of a year and a half, they'd actively chosen to keep me in the dark. I asked my sister what the reasoning was. She said honestly, once the initial decision was made not to tell me during the breakup, it became awkward to bring it up later. That nobody wanted to be the one to explain why they'd hidden it, so they just kept hiding it and hoped I'd never find out. The maid of honor's toast had accidentally exposed what was supposed to stay hidden. And instead of anyone apologizing for excluding me, they were annoyed that it had come out. Like I was the problem for being upset, rather than them being the problem for lying by omission for years. I started limiting contact with my family after that. Not dramatically, just slowly pulling back. Declining some invitations, being less available for family events, keeping conversations surface level. My parents noticed eventually, asked if something was wrong. I told them I was still processing being treated like I couldn't handle adult information about our family. They said I was holding a grudge, that I needed to let it go, that they'd apologized, which they actually hadn't, and I was being stubborn by staying upset. I pointed out they'd had years to tell me and chose not to. That I needed space to deal with the fact that everyone in my family had been in on something I wasn't. My mum said I was being dramatic, that this wasn't a big deal and I was creating distance over nothing. But it wasn't nothing to me. It was about trust and respect, about being included in the family dynamic instead of managed and controlled, about being treated like an adult who could handle complicated information. Things went from bad to unhinged when my aunt called to yell at me for upsetting my parents, said I was being selfish and childish, that families protect each other and sometimes that means not sharing everything. I asked her how she'd feel if she was the only person excluded from major family information. She said that was different. I asked how. She couldn't answer. My cousin, the bride, reached out to apologize, said she hadn't wanted me to be kept in the dark, that it had just sort of happened and then became this thing nobody knew how to undo. I appreciated that. At least someone acknowledged it was messed up, but my parents still don't understand why I'm distant. They think I'm overreacting to a minor incident. They don't get that it shattered my trust in how my family sees me. That discovering I'm the one everyone else talks around, rather than to fundamentally changed how I relate to all of them. I'm cordial at family events, I show up for major holidays, but the closeness is gone. They excluded me from their inner circle, and now they're confused why I've created my own boundaries in response. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so frustrating. They protected me right out of having a real relationship with them. And they still think they did the right thing, and that's where we'll leave tonight's chaos. 15 stories from Emma, Marcus, Jasmine, Devon, Kyle, Priya, Daniel, Tanya, Michael, Liam, Zoe, Cameron, Alicia, Jordan, and Nina. All reminders that betrayal wears many faces, and sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're officially part of the community. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next collection of Reddit's wildest confessions. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the people who truly care about you won't make you question your reality. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from the noise and build something better. Until next time, take care of yourselves.